For all in attendance today, our meeting is live streamed and will be available as a video as well. Noting the presence of a quorum, I would like to call the meeting to order. Pursuant to our bylaws, in the absence of Chairman Bryant, the Commission must elect a member to run the meeting. Would anyone care to make a motion for that?
Mr. Chairman.
And someone second? Second. Thank you.
I have to make the motion.
Oh, sorry. Sorry.
I would make a motion that Mina Wright chair the meeting. No. I told you I would do it.
Bravo.
No, I would like to make a motion that the vice chair chair the meeting.
Thank you. Is there any discussion? A second? Second, Ms. Myers. Please signify your approval by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. Motion's carried. If there is no objection, the open session agenda is adopted as the order of business. Agenda item 1 is a report of the chairman. I'd like to start by saying it's a pleasure to be a part of this and opportunity to run this meeting, and we'll do our best in Chairman Bryant's absence. This morning, several commissioners had the opportunity to visit the Naval Observatory for a tour of the master clock facility and some of the other historic buildings. And that's an item on today's agenda. I really want to thank the Department of the Navy and their staff for providing such an informative tour on this beautiful historic site. I'd also like to please note that the Commission will not meet in August, and our next meeting will be on September 6th. On a personal note, I also note for the record that Delegated Action ZC 18-01 is a map amendment that advances a development being designed by my firm, Torty Gallison Partners. The decision on this project was delegated to the Executive Director for action, and as such, I did not vote on this proposal. Moving to agenda item 2 is the report of the Executive Director, Mr. Acosta.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just have a few notes for today's report. First, I'd like to welcome 2 interns to NCPC. First, we have Brene Smith. Brene is a rising sophomore at the University of Maryland, and she is pursuing a business degree. We're pleased to host Brene, who is participating in the Mayor's Summer Youth Employment Program. She's working in our Office of the Secretariat. Filden Chris. Morgan is a rising senior at the University of Virginia, studying political and social thought with a minor in urban planning. Morgan has been assigned to our Policy and Research Division. Finally, congratulations to our Office of Public Engagement. Our team received 2 national awards from the National Association of Government Communicators for the Commission's new website. Many thanks to Julia Coster, Steve Morgan, Stephen Stodigal, Paul Jutton, and Nick Bernard for their excellent work. And this website was actually done in-house, so kudos to all of you.
Bravo.
And you do have a written report, and that concludes my presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Acosta. Agenda item 3 is a legislative update. Ms. Schuyler.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I do have something to report. It's Senate Bill 1692, which is the National Emergency Medical Services Commemorative Work Act. This authorizes the National Emergency Medical Services Foundation to establish a commemorative work in the district or its environs to commemorate the commitment and service represented by emergency medical services. The bill was approved by the Senate on June 6th of this year, sent to the House. The House has a corresponding bill, H.R. 1037. It too has been approved, and it's been reported out of committee and placed on the union calendar, which means it could be voted on at any point in time. The 2 versions, the House and the Senate, do differ slightly. It's possible the House could simply pass the Senate version, or the House could pass its own, and the 2 will have to reconcile the bill. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Schuyler. Let's move to agenda item 4, which is the consent calendar. There are 4 items on the consent calendar. Item 4A is for approval of the final master plan amendment addendum for Joint Base Anacostia Bowling submitted by the Department of Navy. Item 4B is the approval of preliminary site development plans for 3 antennas at the Beltsville Agricultural Research Center submitted by the Department of Agriculture. Item 4C is for approval of the final master plan for the National Institute of Standards and Technology at their Gaithersburg campus submitted by the Department of Commerce. And item 4D is for approval of the final master plan addendum for the Naval Support Facility, Carderock, submitted by the Department of Navy. May I entertain a motion to approve the item? Thank you. And second? Thank you.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
I just want to make a comment about the Carderock facility. The report, the executive director's report notes that there is further coordination needed between the Navy and the National Park Service having to do with stormwater retention. It's unfortunate that that hasn't already advanced more at this point, and we remain optimistic that that kind of coordination will happen. I'm curious, is there someone here from the Navy about that project, or is nobody's? Oh, there is someone. Okay, I don't have a question for you. I just want to know that you're here to listen. So, okay, on Carderock, just we want to make sure that we have the kind of coordination that's necessary to make sure that the stormwater issues are addressed and the damage to the parkland is addressed as well. So, thank you.
Is there any reason you'd like to change that from consent calendar at this point?
No, not at this point. Okay. But we'll be watching closely.
Any further discussion on any of the items on the consent calendar? Is there a motion to approve this consent calendar?
Yeah, we already have.
Oh, second. Oh, thank you. All in favor? Please signify by aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Unanimous. So first on the open session is agenda item 5A, approval of preliminary site development plans for the South Capitol Street corridor and Frederick Douglass Memorial Bridge project landscape design, submitted by the District Department of Transportation. The Commission provided comments on the concept design at their April 2018 meeting. Mr. Fliss will be making this presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the Commission. As mentioned, the District Department of Transportation has submitted site development plans for the South Capitol Street corridor. As the Chairman just mentioned, you did review and approve the preliminary and final site plans for the bridge component of the project in April. You also provided comments on the concept design for the landscape at that time. Since then, DDOT has continued to revise the plans in response to the Commission and other agency comments. And while DDOT did submit the application for preliminary and final approval, staff is going to describe some additional details that we believe can be worked out before a final approval is granted. So I'll describe those throughout the project presentation today. So just as background, again, South Capitol Street is an important corridor and a link between the main axis of the Capitol building as well as Suitland Parkway, which extends down to Joint Base Andrews. The Frederick Douglass Memorial Bridge, which opened in 1950, does provide the crossing at the Anacostia River. So here you can see that important view looking north with the Capitol in the distance. Nationals Park is on the right side. And here looking south, you can see the Anacostia River and how the bridge is a link between both sides of the river. So today, South Capitol Street provides an important connection for visitors, residents, and commuters, as shown here in this aerial image. It also represents an important element in the ongoing revival occurring along the Anacostia River waterfront, serving both as a focal point connecting both sides of the river, including Poplar Point, historic Anacostia, as well as the Capitol riverfront. So as I mentioned, the project does include two major components, the Frederick Douglass Bridge, shown here, as well as the improvements to the South Capitol Street corridor. The bridge, just as a reminder, includes a triple arched form, including 6 travel lanes, dedicated bike paths, as well as pedestrian paths, and 4 overlooks. The bridge has been subject to numerous consultations with many agencies, and we'll note that if any changes to the design are proposed, they will need to be submitted to the Commission again for review. We also noted in April that the project does include architectural lighting, but the specifics have not yet been determined. The bridge is south of the Capitol, as I mentioned, and there may be impacts to nighttime views depending on the type and intensity of the lighting. The current submission does not include additional details regarding lighting, though DDOT has acknowledged the importance of this issue both in this instance as well as other bridges across the district. NCPC staff have been working to develop a study of bridge lighting for both rivers, thinking about a variety of issues, including city identity, the monumental core, natural systems, and historic resources. This analysis will be provided to DDOT to help inform some of the lighting discussions. And in this particular case for the Frederick Douglass Bridge, staff believes that white lighting is appropriate for illuminating the bridge at night, but again, the intensity and brightness should respect the lighting hierarchy of the U.S. Capitol and other important monuments and memorials. Further, the issue of temporary colored lighting is one that will need input from other federal agencies, including the Commission of Fine Arts and the National Park Service, because of their oversight in certain areas of Washington, D.C. and the Anacostia River, and of course, additional coordination with other district agencies. Staff therefore requests that if temporary colored lighting is considered in this case, that DDOT continue to work with NCPC and other relevant parties. So for the remainder of the presentation, I'm going to really focus on the site improvements and particularly how the design has changed since your last review. I'll focus on your previous comments as well as some other aspects of the design that may need consideration. So starting off, the Commission in April did require DDOT to provide some additional information regarding pedestrian and bicycle access. In particular, there were questions about the width and operation of the proposed pedestrian and bicycle paths. So here you can see an overall framework of the connectivity to and through the site. In response, DDOT has provided some examples of other bridges, both locally and nationally, for comparison purposes. And those you can see here on the screen. Among the examples that were provided, the path widths were typically around 10 feet. The widest path was 14 feet in Portland, which was a bridge that was recently completed in 2015. For comparison, the proposed trails on the Frederick Douglass Bridge will be 18 feet. This will include 2 5-foot bicycle lanes and then one 8-foot pedestrian zone. And again, this is on both sides of the bridge. In all these examples, pedestrians and bicyclists did share the same path. However, in most cases, the path is marked on the ground to denote these 2 pedestrian and bicycle zones. Staff did inquire as to whether some barrier could be used to provide some separation between pedestrians and bicyclists. However, this separation would require at least a foot for the structure and then at least 1 foot on either side to allow avoid conflicts with bicycles and pedestrians. And therefore, the additional barrier in this buffer area would start to decrease the amount of circulation available by several feet. Based upon staff's analysis and also these examples, the proposed path widths appear appropriate, and they do provide the needed connections to the surrounding neighborhoods and existing trails. And this is just an enlarged area showing those connections. DDOT has indicated that after the bridge is completed, there is an opportunity to take a look at how they function and whether operational changes can be necessary. And this may include making the bicycle trails one-directional on either side of the bridge. As such, staff does suggest that DDOT evaluate whether changes to pedestrian and bicycle operations are necessary after the bridge has been completed and in use. So next I'm going to talk about the West Oval, which is shown here on the screen. Today, this is a growing entertainment area. It's also a neighborhood anchored by Nationals Park, as well as the new DC United Stadium or Audi Field, which is in nearby Buzzard Point. Given the surrounding context, the West Oval is proposed to have active programming in a variety of ways, and this proposal is consistent with the concept review you saw in April. The design continues to emphasize that axial relationship with the U.S. Capitol, which is to the north. So in addition to that important north view, the northeast to southeast axis of Potomac Avenue is also an important alignment found within the L'Enfant plan, and so you can see that here on the screen, cutting diagonally across the site. And because this corridor in particular connects the two stadiums, it will likely serve as an important pedestrian connection. In April, staff did note that this access through the oval was not fully successful because it did not align with the cartway on either side of the oval. It also did not resolve pedestrian flows. As such, the Commission requested the applicant explore alternative design concepts to address this alignment, as well as the views of Potomac Avenue, where it crosses the oval to the north. So in response to the Commission's comments, the applicant has revised the design to better resolve this crossing and the intersection with the west oval. For example, the view shed has been defined now through the introduction of new trees to help frame that view, and a star-shaped plaza has been created that reconciles the pedestrian flows from various points. The resulting design creates a space that can be programmed for a variety of events while still accommodating pedestrian movement, and it also, again, preserves that view to the U.S. Capitol. So here's an enlarged view of that area, including the proposed plaza, and also how it would connect to the surrounding sidewalks and paths. And then there on the right, you can see a diagram that shows how the plaza form was generated. At concept review, the Commission also requested the applicant consider how the west oval could accommodate a gateway element, such as a memorial or public art. In response to this request, the submission includes this diagram that shows how a future memorial could be provided, or other element could be provided at the southern end of the oval. This location does take advantage of the axial view of the U.S. Capitol, as well as the alignment of the new bridge, which enters there from the southeast. The topography in this location is also raised slightly to provide a focal point. In general, staff finds this proposed location appropriate, and I will mention that the design at the bottom of the oval was actually modified to accommodate this. Staff does find, however, that the memorial location and this point where the corridor pivots towards the bridge, shown here in this rendering, could be strengthened by better framing the southern end of the oval. While the other sides of this space are clearly defined through tree plantings and hardscape elements, the southern end of the oval has a more diffuse edge, as shown here in this rendering. Improving this southern backdrop of the oval will help provide a better terminus to the oval, as well as South Capitol Street, and will also help visually connect the oval to the bridge. As such, staff does recommend the applicant consider adding additional trees and plantings at the southern end of the oval to terminate South Capitol Street, better frame the public space, improve the setting for any future memorial or public art, and also help reinforce this visual connection between the bridge and the west oval. So next I'm going to talk about the east oval. This area is designed as a more passive space with pathways, natural plantings, and the esplanade that will help connect this area to the riverfront and Poplar Point further north. These diagrams here show how the oval accommodates circulation, programming, landscape, as well as plantings. The East Oval is generally surrounded by open space, including the Anacostia Riverfront and low-density development as it borders Poplar Point, again, Anacostia Park, which is owned by the National Park Service, and Joint Base Anacostia Bowling, which is to the southwest. Portions of Poplar Point and nearby Howard Road could redevelop in the future, although the setting will likely remain more open as compared to the higher density development occurring on the West Oval. In addition, I'll note the East Oval is only one small component of the larger improvements proposed in this area. So as you can see here, the landscaping and reconfiguration of Suitland Parkway, which extends south from the oval towards historic Anacostia, is significant, and the project scope is much larger here than on the west side. Because of the setting, the East Oval could provide an opportunity to develop a larger scale local memorial or public art. In this location, it would not compete directly with the views of the U.S. Capitol, and it could also provide a gateway to Anacostia. Therefore, staff does suggest the Commission find that the East Oval is an opportunity for a gateway element, a future memorial or public art, and further, this oval has the most potential for a large-scale element to distinguish it from other nearby open spaces. In addition, this site could also provide interpretive opportunities related to Anacostia River, Poplar Point, and the historic Anacostia neighborhood. And staff also recommends the applicant consider other opportunities for interpretation and programming which could serve as an amenity to the surrounding community. Like with the West Oval, the Commission also requested the applicant consider how this oval could accommodate a national memorial, local memorial, or other public art. And again, they provided this diagram that shows how this element could be placed in the oval. Again, staff does concur with this placement, given its alignment with the bridge, and it's also its prominent location at the top of the oval. Staff does believe that the visitor experience could be enhanced by increasing the number of trees and other landscaping. Such plantings could be used to reduce the visibility of traffic and also dampen the noise from cars, while still being consistent with the more natural landscape proposed. Landscape elements would need to avoid areas with utilities. Changes in topography could also be incorporated with similar effects. Therefore, staff does suggest incorporating additional trees and plantings where possible to help buffer pedestrians from the noise and views of traffic, particularly in the south end of the oval. And then finally, at concept review, the Commission requested the applicant consider an additional pedestrian access to the oval from the northeast corner of the site, which is circled here in red. Staff still believes this suggestion is relevant, as a crossing could provide further connectivity from Poplar Point and Howard Road, which is further to the east here. We suggest the applicant continue to explore this direct pedestrian and bicycle connection. At concept review, the Commission also requested additional information regarding stormwater management. The applicant has provided that information, and they will comply with the District Department of Energy and Environment regulations. Runoff will be captured and filtered in several locations throughout the project. We have bioswales and other measures situated in certain locations which will accommodate that runoff. And finally, other information regarding signage, lighting, and other elements have yet to be fully developed. And as such, staff recommends the Commission request that DDOT provide the following information for future review. This would include a lighting plan for the ovals and the esplanades, as well as the bridge, which we discussed, a signage plan that describes how that will be accommodated, and then also details regarding the cultural legacy of Frederick Douglass and how they might be incorporated into the project, consistent with the visual design goals described in the final EIS. And so it is therefore the Executive Director's recommendation that the Commission approve the preliminary plans for the South Capitol Street corridor landscape and site improvement, notes that staff is developing an analysis of bridge lighting, and in this case finds that white lighting is appropriate, but the intensity and brightness should respect the lighting hierarchy of the U.S. Capitol and other monuments. Requests that if temporary colored lighting is considered, that DDOT work with the appropriate stakeholders on an operational agreement, and also recommends DDOT evaluate pedestrian and bicycle operations after the bridge has been completed. Regarding the East Oval, notes that the siting here is different compared to the West Oval, and finds that the site could be an opportunity for a large-scale memorial or art element, and also additional interpretive and programming opportunities related to the river, Poplar Point, and historic Anacostia. Staff also recommends additional trees and plantings to help buffer traffic views and noise, and requests DDOT consider other pedestrian connections at the northeast side of this oval to improve connectivity. And then finally, requests DDOT provide information regarding lighting, signage, and also details regarding the cultural legacy of Frederick Douglass and how they might be incorporated into the project. And that concludes my presentation. I'm available for questions. We also have representatives from DDOT and their team here as well. Thank you.
Any questions for Mr. Fliss? Oh, yes.
I had a question. We received one question from a member of the public in advance, or a comment letter from Brenda Richardson citing a disparity of treatment between the two ovals. And I'm wondering if that's an issue that staff discussed with DDOT or with others, or whether you can address it in any way.
I think that's probably a question for DDOT.
Okay. So maybe we should, I'd be happy to hear from them now, if that's okay.
Okay.
So who's going to speak for DDOT on this?
Good afternoon. My name is Rick Kenny. I'm with the District Department of Transportation. I'm the Deputy Chief Engineer. Delmar Lytle is unable to join us today. For those of you who know him, he's our program manager. He's on a well-deserved summer vacation with his family. I am nevertheless familiar with the project and will do my best to cover today. Would like to begin with some broader aspects of our design approach and discuss how we got to the concept that we're with today. The project design is context sensitive. It means that specific elements of the project are designed to respond to their specific surroundings. The west side oval in particular responds to being part of the L'Enfant plan and also a heavily high-density urbanized development. On the east side, the difference is the surroundings are the Anacostia River, the Anacostia Park, the Suitland Parkway. It's notable that the Suitland Parkway is listed on the National Register of Historic Places, and in our EIS it is also noted as a historic asset. The second point I'd like to make is that both ovals are designed to be attractive destinations and to host special programming. While each design is different, both ovals will be able to host special programs and special events. Special events bring the community to the waterfront, and this is an opportunity for community development and economic development. One can imagine in the future even situations where activities are coordinated between both ovals, such as the Cherry Blossom Festival, Anacostia River Fest, and hopefully someday when the Nationals win a World Series championship. The third point, the discussion of open space on both sides of the river really needs to include both the ovals and the waterfront esplanades. The open spaces connecting the bridge to the ovals with the Anacostia River are critical components of the project. On the east side, the esplanade is much wider, and more generous space allows for greater programming opportunities. This could include family gatherings, group picnics, and even a small carnival. The fourth point, the East Oval and Esplanade are the catalyst to further transform the point of Poplar Point. Federal legislation has been passed to transfer Poplar Point to the district, and the Frederick Douglass Memorial Bridge project is the first step towards opening this part of Ward 8 to the public as new public space for the users. This project will also make open space improvements between the Oval and the riverfront, and that will be another new place for the community to gather. Special events, we can imagine permits in the future for weddings, concerts, and fairs right at the river edge where you can take in views of the city skyline, the iconic bridge, lighting at night, and the reflections in the water, if you can imagine that. The last point, the East Oval and Esplanade design facilitates multimodal access to all of Anacostia Park. The design of the East Oval is intended to bring many people to Anacostia Park with a dedicated access road and dedicated multi-purpose trails. This will increase access to the Anacostia Park for all communities adjacent to it, the residents of Ward 8, and the city as a whole. With that, that's kind of our broader approach of what guided us in developing the concept. I'd like to also acknowledge we received comments from ANC Commissioner Greta Fuller at our quarterly Communications Committee meeting. There were also very good comments about looking more closely at the programming opportunities in the East Oval. So this, with the comments that you had formally made mention to, we see an opportunity to further refine this design with that goal in mind. And if successful with a concept approval today, we will be back with a final design approach. We do hope to emphasize the broader aspects. There's really a river edge to take advantage of here and an oval. That's the benefit of the east side, that we're working with much more green space and much more opportunity. As you know, there's parking opportunities too at Anacostia Drive. If I was going to go there today, that's how I would access the river's edge. So with that, that would conclude my response to the comments, and I'm available for any further questions. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman.
Sorry, if I could continue on this just a bit. I mean, first of all, I appreciate your stepping in. I know Mr. Lytle is very well versed in the project, and you're stepping into the breach. Sorry about that. I guess you kind of addressed the question, but it has to do with the difference in treatment and how the oval that is on the west side of the river has been designed to be more formal and be more like other circles and squares in the L'Enfant City. And what we heard in this comment was something that, well, why would we treat the oval on the other side so differently in terms of the design approach? I can understand how on the west side, it's all surrounded by buildings. They're not yet, but there will be buildings all around it. But there's, once if Poplar Point is ever transferred and developed, because it's only been 12 years and 6 months so far since that was authorized. There's also other development that's happening along Howard Road that's going to be butting up against this, right?
Sure.
It seems like at least on one side you're going to have the same kind of urban context. So, I guess it's a legitimate question. You're saying that this is something that you're looking to refine further?
Certainly. I think as it shows that, some of the original terms, the guiding words for this concept were pastoral, natural, respecting the river. It's a much different environment, but it's fair to say that there is going to be a desire to use the oval space. It's possible that it'll be more desirable to be down at the river's edge, and because that space hasn't been made, it hasn't been a desirable space in the way that it will be once the bridge is complete. And so I guess I was only trying to emphasize that we would like to look at the area as a whole and look at opportunities to improve access and programming opportunities. Clearly, there's an emphasis right now because we're constrained. The city's constrained with green space on the west side of the river, and it's heavily urbanized. So, the DuPont Circle comparative was quickly made. That's not today on the East Oval. Quite possibly in the future it will be. Today we have Anacostia Park, still National Park Service land, undeveloped Howard Road, but planned development coming. Joint Base is still on the south side, and then Suitland Parkway to the south. So I guess what we're trying to say is that we started with a fairly strict interpretation of natural pastoral setting, and that's what the images are showing. It is not a major change for DDOT to be able to adopt this landscape design to accommodate further programming needs. It's not a major change, but because it's a departure from what we've shown today, we're going to have to, after we make those changes, incorporate it with the final design and bring it back for review and comment. It is different than how we've been marching along thus far.
I just want to remind everyone we haven't yet heard from the public. So if you have any questions directed as to the presentation, let's take those now, or we can wait until after public comment. Questions now? Okay. So,
can I just, Mr. Chairman, can I just follow up on that?
Absolutely.
I really appreciated the address of the one comment that came in. On the reverse, I wonder if they had been done exactly the same, how many comments would we have saying, how come you didn't treat these differently? But what I found in the substance of it is that the site context, I believe is what you're saying, was really reflected in the design that's being proposed today, and I think it's very appropriate. I think the more formal aspect on the one side represents exactly what's happening there currently, and then the connection to the park and the green, I also think works fairly well. So in my opinion, looking at this, I think that the immediate site context has been reflected well in the proposed design.
I'd like to go to public comment, and then we'll come back and have more time to discuss this, if that's okay. So before we discuss this further, we have 3 people registered to speak today. Marion Dombrowski, speaking as an individual, Greta Fuller on behalf of ANC 8A, and Philip Pinnell with the Anacostia Coordinating Council. Ms. Dombrowski, you will have 3 minutes to speak. Are you here? Ms. Dombrowski? Okay, let's move to speaker number 2. Ms. Fuller, you were speaking on behalf of ANC 8A. Welcome. You have 5 minutes. Yes, the speaker.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for taking the time to listen to us today, to me especially. I did bring copies of the letter from the ANC, and I know you didn't receive it because we just had our meeting on Tuesday, so we weren't able to get that out to you. So I'll read it very briefly. And what it says is Advisory Neighborhood Commission 8A, ANC 8A, conducted a public meeting on Tuesday, June 10, 2018, at the Department of Housing and Community Development Housing Resource Center located at 1800 Martin Luther King Jr. Avenue, Southeast, to address the above design, the design that we're speaking of today. At the Commission's monthly meeting, the Commission voted 5-0, all in favor of forwarding recommendations to the National Capital Planning Commission. The recommendation and motion is to support the overall project. However, we think that more emphasis is needed on the programming and event space on the East Oval. Or the Frederick Douglass Bridge. The Commission, ANC 8A, appreciates the conservation of green space. We very well know green space. We live on the Anacostia River. We have Oxon Hill Run Park. We have Fort DuPont Park. We back up to Joint Base Anacostia. We very much know green space and conservation. And that's why today we're saying more programming, more events to have a more balanced side of the river for us. We also realize that, I'm kind of going off script, but you're going to see all of this. We also know that Poplar Point itself is going to have a certain amount of space that will remain green space just because of the laws in place or because of the conservation that we want to continue to see there. But we also know that the piece of that land at Poplar Point is also known as Columbian Quarters. And Columbian Quarters they are owned by a private developer. And at some point it will be developed and it will have space that will accommodate housing, accommodate retail, and other types of amenities such as businesses. So we're trying to say, let's get ready for that. We only have one chance to build the Frederick Douglass Bridge. And when we build the Frederick Douglass Bridge and we build the ovals and we think of this bridge and the east and the west ovals, let's think of amenities that bring people to the park. We already come to Anacostia Park. We already see otters, beavers, birds, and whatever other kind of animals are at the riverside, and we enjoy all of them. Sometimes not all, raccoons and possums. But what I'm saying is this, is that we need something on the East Oval to actually bring the people from Ward 8 down to the East Oval. Let's not forget, we already have Anacostia Joint Base. We already have Homeland Security. We have a thriving historic Anacostia community, of which I am the ANC commissioner for. And we all want to enjoy this new Frederick Douglass Bridge. Let's not miss the point. We missed a little bit on the 11th Street Bridge. I was also part of that. I understood when the 11th Street Bridge came that they couldn't put down the tracks for the train because they said it wasn't approved yet. But yet we still have lighting on that bridge that was not approved. And they keep saying we're getting train tracks. I don't see any train tracks. I even heard this gentleman say 12 years ago, they said we had Poplar Point was going to be turned over. When are the train tracks coming across that bridge, you know? So let's not miss this opportunity while we're digging up dirt, while we're moving construction, while we have people moved around, and we have this vision. Let us all enjoy this side, the East Oval, as well as the West Oval, during my lifetime. I don't want to come back and Poplar Point still isn't turned over to to the District of Columbia properly. I'd really like more people to really understand and feel like this is true what the mayor says, one city. One city. There is no separation. The river is a gathering place. It's not a separating place. And with that, I'd like to say ANC 8A asked the Commission to consider implementing and improving the programming and design to attract more visitors on the East Oval as well as the West Oval of the Frederick Douglass Bridge. Thank you for your time, and I will submit, if I'm allowed to, my written speech that I said today. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Fuller, and please do submit your comments. We would appreciate them, and appreciate your wisdom and passion in representing the community. And it's a good thing you're still young. Said in your lifetime. So, next, I'd like to invite Mr. Pennell, who is speaking on behalf of the Anacostia Coordinating Council. You'll have 5 minutes to speak, Mr. Pennell. Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Commissioners. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to testify this afternoon. I am a Ward 8 resident and a member of the Frederick Douglass Bridge Quarterly Communications Committee. At its last committee meeting, a PowerPoint presentation was given regarding possible conceptual usages for the East and West Ovals at the feet of the bridge. The possibilities presented for the West Oval included a large screen on which sporting games and movies could be shown, a farmer's market, and other amenities. The East Oval was presented as an area consisting almost completely of green space. While the residents of Ward 8 prize green spaces and welcome the opportunity to engage in passive recreational activities, in my opinion, they would equally appreciate having the same or similar amenities that are offered on the west side of the bridge. I realize that at the current developmental stage of the bridge, future programming of activities in the ovals is purely conceptual, but I hope that equal weight will be given to think about possibilities for active recreational activities in the East Oval. I am the Executive Director of the Anacostia Coordinating Council, ACC, which is in its 35th year as a nonprofit consortium of individuals and organizations concerned with and involved in the revitalization of Anacostia and its adjacent neighborhoods. Your NCPC colleague, Arrington Dixon, is ACC's Chairman Emeritus. Although today I am not testifying in my official role with that organization, I can safely state that the ACC is willing to engage in collaborative efforts to keep Ward 8 residents informed of the developmental stages of the bridge and gather input from them regarding plans for programming in the East Oval. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Pennell. Yes,
Point
sir.
of personal privilege. I want to welcome Phil here. This is his first time testifying before NCPC. And that is either a good thing or a bad thing. Because Phil testifies at the council and other places all the time. And he's been very important in Anacostia and with the coordinating council in particular. So thank you, Phil, for coming. We welcome you back again on other issues.
Okay, thank you.
We look forward to it. I just want to also note that in concluding the public testimony, we also received some inspirational comments from Ms. Brenda Lee Richardson, which we all received prior to the meeting today. So thank you, Ms. Richardson, for that.
Chairman,
So
I want
like
to open up again.
Yes, sir.
I intended to wait until the public witnesses had spoken before I got into this. And so my colleagues have made some points that I wanted to make also. But they did them very well, as always. They got ahead of us on this. I want to make it clear that we are very, as always, apparently, optimistic and hopeful that things will come to our side of the river that will not only be futuristic, but be for the current population. But we also want to be vigilant because if we're not, things can slip. We also, as it's been said, we appreciate the fact we encourage this grass, pastoral park area because we don't really want to become overwhelmed with high buildings and lose our beautiful Anacostia Park. I think it's just a real gem. But we don't want to be a park that's being maintained for another population to come across the bridge. And nothing is done right now while we're doing this to make it suitable and and attractive to those who live there now. So I think that's one of the pitches to see whether we can get focused now. I think the espionage gives a clear picture of how we want to connect this more to the river and less to the oval, I think. And I've talked with the staff a lot about this, and I made it clear I think they're doing a great job. I think they're very sensitive. I think the fact that they recognize that this isn't a gateway to the city, this is a gateway to Anacostia and a gateway to the capital area, but our community is the beginning of the city, and we think that's very important to remember. We want to be included in that. I do have to point out that if you look at your slides, like page 19, it's a very very thorough presentation of amenities and activities, but there is no page 19 for the East Oval. I think there was one at one time, but I think that reflects the fact staff and others are taking us seriously about trying to think this through and using clearly the broader space, not just the Oval, but the space that is on the park to be connected to this. All this, though, is very contingent upon what happens to Popular Point. That's a lot going on around that, which we are very hopeful about, that could also affect this whole development around this oval. But I want this to be a popular point for people east of the river now, not just a popular point for people later on once the buildings get brought up on the west side, and then people will happily come across the bridge to use the park the way we'd like to use it now also. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm very encouraged that we'll go forward with this, and I think that Phil has already indicated, as we have historically, for the 30 years I chaired ACC, try to engage the community in this, and I think that Greta and the ANC commissioners will do the same if we get the inclusion in the process. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Other comments? Ms. White.
I appreciate the conversation around the programming and the access to the river and public space. And one thing that strikes me in both the write-up and in the graphics is how will people get there safely? And I don't quite understand these pedestrian crossings, so I'd like to hear a little bit more about how will this work with the traffic, because this is going to be really busy to cross 3 lanes, and where you have these crossings are look a bit challenging, and I don't know if there's thinking about traffic signals or what have you. So I'd like to hear more about that. And then in the write-up, it says the commission recommends that DDOT evaluate whether changes to the pedestrian and bicycle operations are necessary after the bridge has been completed and in use. I'd like that to be a whole lot stronger than recommend, because after you build it, that's when you know how people are going to use it. And I think it would be important for us to ask that be a requirement that happened, and that they come back and show us how, what they're finding, how it's going to change if it needs to change. But if you could tell us a little bit more about how are pedestrians safely going to get into that oval and
Sure.
around the network.
So I'll just use the East Oval as an example. Let me get my highlighter. All of these that are proposed crossings are signalized. So essentially you would have to add a signal to an island, and then wait for the next signal to cross the next set of lanes. So very similar to like a DuPont circle. So they are all signalized.
And you're going to have gatherings in this space, and that looks like a pretty small island to me. Or I imagine that'll get worked out as you have events to do traffic control, but I'd just like to hear more as this is developed, what kind of traffic counts they're expecting with pedestrians and bikes. And if I missed that in here, I apologize. But
I'm not sure if we addressed that question specifically, but it's clearly a good question. One of the major changes that's going to happen here, the design speed of the oval is 20 miles per hour, and the speed limit posting is 15 miles per hour. So this is a completely different experience for drivers and pedestrians as compared to, you're familiar with how it is today after you go over the bridge, the choice between South Capitol Street or Suitland, and there's an opportunity to pick up speed as long as traffic isn't backed up at rush hour. But this is going to be a completely different experience after the project's complete with 15 miles per hour. I think of it more like a Lincoln Park, minus probably the speed humps. Also, each crosswalk is signalized. So there'll be an opportunity to push to get a pedestrian controlled right-of-way, lower speeds. And I think also a lot of the emphasis, as we discussed earlier on the east side, it's not just about the oval. It's also the riverfront access. Did I answer your question?
You answered it. I'll be curious to see how this works.
Okay.
And I think taking a harder look at perhaps some traffic calming besides the speed.
I wouldn't
Because the
rule
tendency
that.
will be people will want to go faster.
And I wouldn't rule that out for the future. A lot of times, and I appreciate the comments about the bicycle and pedestrian multi-use path on the bridge to see how that will work. But we're proceeding, informed by best practices and design guidelines. It's no secret we have many intersections, much less complicated than this, that aren't performing and need further traffic calming. But I think, as we see, it would probably be, on days when this is programmed, as I think we would all aspire it to, thinking about the World Cup celebration or, a festival in the summer, there's probably temporary parking around it. It's very busy. It's looking more like a Lincoln Park kind of, with a wedding in the middle of the oval. So there'll be different personalities at different times of day. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Yes. Commissioner Cash.
Just in looking at this, I want to throw out there, this reminds me a lot of Detroit. There's a similar oval of this called Campus Mauritius Park. It's won a ton of awards, but the reason that it's very successful, it's right in the middle of downtown and it has a lot of signalized intersections. It's a big oval, I think actually smaller than this, but it's really the programming that's key to keeping that activated and just to being a good urban space versus just having this park and not doing the programming. So I would just really urge the district as we move forward with this to make sure that there's a very robust programming effort here, especially because we're not talking about the downtown bit or a lot of these other programmatic things that go on, like right down Freedom Plaza. There's a ton of programming going on there. So I think it might be one of the challenges that is unique to this area, having this kind of urban park down there without the support of the bid. So I just wanted to throw that out there.
If I could respond, please. As District Department of Transportation, we can do our best to find ways to turn the site over for different uses and have programming capabilities, but we don't work with programming. As you've mentioned, the bids, the neighborhood groups, private events, that's all, that others will adopt that and carry that banner, and I agree that's going to be very important here. I just wanted to be clear. We love the idea of helping further facilitate that, but to commit about how the programming is happening, we can only make good suggestions. Yeah.
Mr. Chairman, I want to add to that. I think it's pretty obvious that the programming opportunities will come on the west side. Just look what's around it. Right. I mean, all these huge sporting events. I mean, the baseball team would have their opening of the stadium in Maryland, Virginia. They didn't have an opening, even in D.C., if you all remember that. I will never forget that. That's when they opened up outside of the city, but celebrating. We don't want that to happen with these two ovals. And I think we got to find a way to get those folks to understand that they have to spill some of their resources across the bridge to the other side where we also are benefiting, need to benefit. And it makes sense. I also think the espionage that goes under the bridge, programming up in that area and out is probably it's very significant to us too, more so than even the oval, which I think you all are thinking about. I do have a question though. I know that there's a sewer issue going on here, and I want to understand that before we go too much further, if I could, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, there are two utility lines. They're old sewer lines that bisect the site, so there are some limitations in terms of what you can put on there, which I understand from the design team limits, planting trees and things on those sewers. They're actually relatively close to the surface. So
you mean in terms of the oval?
Yes, going through the oval.
How do they proceed through the oval? Can you?
They go kind of north-south like
through the whole thing. And the sewer problem, it happens to be what, old pipelines that could be damaged? What's the story?
Yes, that's what we understand. I don't know if DDOT has more information, but they are kind of older utilities that are in place. They are used, so they can be damaged.
Can they be replaced so they can't be damaged? While they dig it?
I mean, certainly any facility could be replaced. It's not currently programmed in DC Water's capital improvement plan. There's also a 108-inch diameter sewer running right under the bridge abutment where it touches ground, and that's presenting incredible design issues for us too. It's a force main; it can't be taken out of service, and so, there's a lot happening below the surface here with existing aging infrastructure. But the DC Water's position on these were to protect in place as opposed to replace or relocate.
How big are the lines that are running through the oval?
Are they two 96-inch pipes in the oval and 108-inch running north-south at the bridge abutment?
This is very troublesome to me because the residents in Southeast are facing some very high water bills now, which is very hard for us. I say us. And we're paying for a new system to go in that some of us won't be around to even benefit from. And now we have an old system underneath of something that we would like to optimize, and it's threatening to crumble on us. That's my reminder to drink water, by the way, on that. But so it seems to me that maybe this is fragile, and maybe we need to think about it now rather than later. I don't know.
Sure. If I could offer, some of the things that were discussed earlier, like a screen to be able to watch movies and things like that, those types of programs won't be precluded.
Right.
And typically, we're looking for view sheds through the circles and ovals anyhow. That's what's happening on the west side. So I think while it presents some constraint, we aren't contemplating multi-story buildings in the oval. And I think clearly that's not on the table today. And so I think we could work around it. We're probably talking more like varied landscaping. You saw the image earlier where there was lots of native grass and things like that. That would probably be replaced with permeable hard surface so that we could have tables and chairs and farmers market area. But a lot of these type of programming opportunities, I don't think would be precluded by DC Water's infrastructure. I'm sorry if that had ever been indicated as a way to preclude programming. I don't think that that's a fair response. Thank you.
Commissioner Wright.
I think part of the problem is that could you zoom out to the bridge and the two ovals as a composition doesn't hang together, in my view, because of the disparity in the level of formalism. The West Oval is very formal. I would say too formal, almost feels regimented to a point where I might not even want to be there. And it doesn't feel appropriate, not only in juxtaposition to the East Oval, but also if you really zoom out and you start thinking about a planning hierarchy, the next stop is the mall. And the mall is, and the West Oval has its triple rows of trees and all of that, but it almost feels too small to carry it off. And I don't agree with CFA's entire letter because I think the creation of a wetland area is kind of nutty to think about in this space. But I do think that it's a fair criticism to say that it's the design of the West Oval is it loses some appeal, I think, in comparison to the East Oval, despite what a lot of people have been saying. I think the East Oval is a place where I would want to be before I'd want to be in the West Oval as it's designed right now, because if you then layer on all the programming ideas, there's going to be a lot going on in the West Oval, and I'm not sure that you're going to have too much room to feel comfortable doing it. So, and the part where, and I think it's kind of true, it feels like it was designed by planning instead of in 2 dimensions instead of 3. And I would urge the design team to just relax a little bit on the West Oval and bring a little bit of the of the joie de vivre that you can see in the East Oval. It feels way too formal for this space. And maybe some of the discomfort that we're hearing about. If you really think about it as a composition, it's just they're too different. What they have in common is the paperclip oval shape. And that's it.
Yes, Commissioner Shaw.
Well, I thank you for your comments, Ms. Wright. And I think we've talked about this before about the context of place, right? That we just put the green over the ovals and don't look over the fact that I was at Buzzard Point for the ribbon cutting, and it's amazing how it's changed, and the really intense streetscape plan and open space plan for Buzzard, the openings for the National Park, for Nationals Park. And so sort of seeing this within the context of these two green things doesn't give the appropriate context of how it's fitting into a larger planning system. And that's on both sides as well. So we've had a strong intention of the green space and, sort of that, like, I remember we were doing Shepherd Parkway and we were fighting over the brick sizes and all that. It's meant, you remember in like the little lanterns, it's meant to look and feel a different way, and we've planned it that way, right? And so I think that both of these are responding to the respective places in which we've sort of put those two sides. And so I like that it has the two personalities there, but once again, this may be just in the future, how we show the larger context of what's going on here. And then for DDOT, just once again, we've been a very happy partner with you as Office of Planning on all of the things that have come here in terms of design. And so I think for any of the comments that come to DDOT, I'm taking those also as the Office of Planning for making sure that we can, either in our engagement, programming, and other things, make sure we can get the appropriate larger planning context for this.
Commissioner Cash.
Actually, I have another question. It just struck me. Who owns the ovals, the interior? It's the district, correct?
It is.
There's no Park Service or anything. Is DDOT going to be maintaining these, or are you going to turn them over to DPR? Because I'm thinking from the programming discussion and all that, DDOT really, that's not your forte, but DPR has a lot of experience with programming. And I think these ovals are going to be an interesting addition to the district's portfolio, because when we talk about Stanton Park and a lot of these other ones, DuPont Circle, all of those are federal government circles, and there's a lot of programming that goes on there in coordination with National Park Service or because they're closer to downtown. But this is really going to be the district's first bite at the apple, I guess, with trying to have these interior road parks. And no offense to DDOT, but I mean, I think that we should really consider maybe turning this over to DPR to make sure that it doesn't just turn into a piece of grass surrounded by a road and that the piece of grass is actually programmed. So are there plans for that, or have you gotten to that stage yet? Is OP just going to run it, or?
So it's so it is public right of way. It's district owned land and DDOT controlled. On the west side, we usually partner when we can with bids. So Capitol Riverfront bid is already interested, and it would not surprise me if we see increased interest also from Audi Field and Nationals Ballpark for that park. For the East Oval, as future plans come to fruition, right now that there is no sponsor looking to program immediately, and as upon ribbon cutting, can we have that event? So as it stands, it would be DDOT, DPW maintaining grass, and it wasn't contemplated to turn it over to DPR as a Parks and Recreation facility.
Yeah, because I'm just thinking about Stead Park over near 17th and P, where that's run by DPR and it's a lot of green space and there's opportunities to program a lot of stuff. So I would just really urge the executive to consider maybe partnering, especially when you're talking on the East Oval, if you don't have a lot of partners already. DPR is kind of like that natural district partner that can kind of force some programming down there and bring their little stage trailer down there and have some concerts or something to program that side when it might not otherwise kind of come naturally. So I would just really implore you to see about maybe putting this into DPR or to DPR's portfolio instead of DDOT's after it's completed.
Thank you for your comment.
Any further? Yes, Mr. May.
Buried my button there. So I agree with a lot of what has been said today, and I agree with some of the comments that we heard or read from Ms. Richardson. I mean, there does seem to be a bit of a disconnect in the design, and there is, it's very hard for me to conceive of these ovals as having grown beyond their inherent nature as traffic facilities, right? They're a way of managing traffic with lots of roads intersecting with them at relatively high speeds. I mean, I know we may dream of the speed limit being only 20 miles an hour. I mean, the speed limit around Lincoln Park is 25, and you can go 25 even over the speed bumps. I know because I do it all the time, and it's kind of fun. But it is, I mean, it's also a widely used neighborhood facility, and that has to do with, the way it has matured over time and the spaces that are within it, and the relationship of that park to the surrounding neighborhood. I mean, it fits within that overall context, and I'm just having a hard time getting comfortable with this. Now, I'm a little confused about exactly what action we're taking today. This was submitted for preliminary and final, and we're contemplating giving preliminary but not final.
Correct.
Right. And I also, I mean, I read the CFA letter over and over again. I'm trying to understand exactly what direction they're providing, and I don't think that's very clear either. But I do think that thinking more three-dimensionally and thinking more about the future development at Poplar Point actually would be very important for understanding that, because, having the meadow kind of approach, I mean, first of all, this is a weird shape to begin with, right? We don't have any ovals like this, and it's not really an oval anyway. It's a circus, right? I think I've said that before. The shape is not really an oval.
I looked it up. It's a paperclip oval because I had the same thing.
Oh, it's a paperclip
this is
oval?
not an oval.
Yeah, it's not oval.
Yeah.
Anyway,
So that's the generic term.
But it's weird, and it's weird in the sense that we don't have anything else like it in Washington. We have plenty of circles and we have plenty of squares, and it's hard to envision how this is going to happen when we also know that this is a heavily trafficked road, right? I mean, the volume of traffic that's going to come around these circles far exceeds that. It probably goes around Lincoln Park, right? It's probably 2, 3, 4 times as much. And the speeds at which people will want to take it is going to be driven by the curve of the road, not the number on the sign. So I mean, I want these to be very successful and useful spaces, but it still feels like it's not where it needs to be yet. So I mean, I'm not going to stop this from getting a preliminary approval because I know we're going to have to see final. But I think that there does need to be substantially more development in the design approach to both of these circles. And I wish I could offer some perspective on how to do that. I can't. I'm kind of at a loss as to how it should be. All I can say is try to make sense of what CFA says and think more about Poplar Point's future, and that may help figure out what it's going to be. And I just would hate to have it all be reliant on, more traffic lights and speed bumps and things like that in order to make it a safe place for people to be. So, by the way,
or pleasant. Or pleasant. That's
pleasant,
the thing.
right.
I mean,
yeah, I mean,
I get why they put all the trees in as buffers from the traffic and all of that, but it's almost it's pinching it into this little lawn area that, when all is said and done, it's kind of uninteresting.
Yeah.
And so the thredimensional thing is, I was with CFA until they got to the wetlands thing, because then you're just adding another ingredient. But it feels just too uniform.
I mean, I do feel like there are some other lessons in making parks like this that haven't been examined at this point. So and I don't know where those lessons are here. I mean, some of the things about Lincoln Park that help it, I think, are the changes in grade. You have the high platform in the center, and then you have the more recessed area which is where kids feel more comfortable playing. And you've got a lawn there, and there's the Bethune statue, which the kids love to climb all over and hide under and everything. I mean, but it has a sort of refuge sense to it, even though there are cars moving around it all the time. It's also not far from where people live. It's 2 lanes of traffic and 1 lane of parking. And here we've got how many lanes? I mean, 3 lanes, and it's all travel lanes. I'm not sure. I think some manipulation of grade is important in order to create some refuge. And you obviously can't sink much on the east side, but something more that creates manageable space or habitable space.
Any new additional ideas that haven't been expressed so far? I want to hear. I mean, I think we've heard concerns about pedestrian safety and clearly programming. Who will be the partner? We hear on the west side there's a bid. Who's the partner on the east side? Is it ACC? Who is it that can help with this programming? And then who will manage these parks, and how to design it in a way that will make it a safe refuge and inviting destination for the community to be a part of. So I think we've given a lot of feedback to Department of Transportation, and if there are no further comments, I'd like to entertain a motion to approve the preliminary site development plan. Thank you, Mr. Shaw.
Sorry.
Yes.
I think Commissioner White had a recommendation to amend the EDR.
Pardon me.
I didn't know if we needed a motion first, and then I would.
We do.
Amend.
Yeah. And then.
So move.
Okay. And then any discussion on that motion?
You have amendments.
The discussion is I would request that we change the language instead of recommending that DDOT evaluate whether changes to pedestrian and bicycle operations are necessary after the bridge has been completed and in use. I don't know what the appropriate language is, but require that they do that and come back and let us know what they find.
I think require is a very clear word.
I accept that as an amendment. When that doesn't vote.
Do I have a second to that amendment?
Second.
Any discussion on the amendment before we go?
Just to clarify, this is an advisory action, so
Mm-hmm.
DDOT will come back, but I just want to make it clear that this is an advisory action. It's outside the city area.
And I just,
So what are you suggesting, and how could we make this stronger than require? Okay.
You just can't enforce it.
You can't enforce
Got
it.
it. But our approval is based on this, in my mind, so. But I hear what you're saying.
so I have a
But the overall action is advisory.
I have a concern about the amendment, just because we're not traffic engineers. You know what I mean? I feel like at some moment, DDOT is going to be doing these things and adjusting accordingly as new infrastructure is in, and I just don't see how we can where we would have the expertise to provide any value in them telling us what they did. I mean, that's the moment once again where there's oversight from the city council and there's partnerships with other agencies and their own accountability for their processes. But I just don't see what value coming back to us would add.
So I guess in my mind, we're already recommending they do it. I think our approval is based on wanting this to be a safe place. It would be almost just as a report back to show what happened. The other thing is recommending that something be evaluated is not a commitment from DDOT to do that. And DDOT saying, yeah, we're open to evaluating it. If they don't commit to it, it could just slip off. Not that it's nefarious, but unless it's in the actual approval item. And there's a commitment to do that.
Mr. Chairman, we have DDOT here where they object to this county plan. Is that a fair request?
I think that's a great question.
What I was thinking as I was sitting there is regardless of whether it's entered as a requirement or not, our stakeholders, our users, both Pedestrian Advisory Council and WABA, they're going to be there with us. They're the advocacy. We're going to hear from them how the bridge is performing, and that's going to. We'll be getting immediate feedback, and we're accustomed to responding. If a fix is required and brought to our attention, and we go out and assess that. That's part of DDOT's responsibility. So, on some projects move slower than others, but when we get into this commissioning period, we'll still have our contractor on board. It's the easiest time. It's kind of a soft finish to the project because we open the bridge while we're demolishing the old structure for 6 months, and so. I fully expect we're going to get feedback if it's not operating appropriately, and we'll be handling it regardless of whether we come back.
Mr. Chairman, let me repeat is it acceptable to you to do this? Is there a yes or no problem?
I don't know logistically if it's a problem with the direction due to approval authority or not. We're going to do it anyway.
So
I
it's
can
not a
commit
problem
to
for
that.
you because you're going to do it.
Yeah.
That's the question I wanted to answer.
And to me, it's just formalizing it also helps educate us. If we got a report afterwards to show what worked, what didn't, and then it helps us evaluate the next project. So I hear what you're saying, and I respect it, and I'm not saying we're traffic engineers, but I do think it makes a difference to see how this worked. I can't think of another place that's quite like this in DC that we've reviewed. So that's the spirit in which I put it out there. I think this is going to be a challenge for you.
There's only a partial risk, I guess I would say, is sometimes we do get into situations between all of our stakeholders where DDOT's striving to find the right balance, and depending on which perspective is coming, whether it's bicyclist, pedestrian, vehicular, freight, it's a hard decision to make. I wouldn't ask anyone else to join us in that decision-making process, but you're welcome to. Is all I wanted. That's one of the hardest parts of our job is finding that balance. And so I expect if it's not performing, we're going to have to address it, and we're welcome to participate together. It's fine. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kenny.
Thank you.
We appreciate the commitment to engaging the community in this process. So we have a motion to amend the EDR to change the word from recommends in the last paragraph to say require DDOT to evaluate whether changes to pedestrian and bicycle operations are necessary after the bridge has been completed and in use. We've had a motion and a second. Yes.
Mr. Chairman, was there also after in use to say and that DDOT report back to the commission on this issue? Was that was what I wrote down as you were. It's okay.
Okay. So if we could, I'd like to move to a vote on the acceptance of the motion that has been raised and seconded accordingly. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. All opposed? One no. Okay, now let's move to entertaining a motion to approve the preliminary site development plans as presented. Is there a motion? Thank you. Thank you. And seconded? Yes. Any further discussion on this? Yes, Mr. May.
Yeah, one thing I forgot to note is that we do remain very concerned about the lighting of the bridge itself and are looking forward to further discussions on that. And we're not a fan of color. I think that's probably not a secret. But maintaining the proper hierarchy between the things that are lit at night in Washington, I think, is incredibly important. And so we want to understand that very, very well. And so I look forward to hearing more about that later.
Mr. Chairman, I want to speak to, I know the residents east of the river will miss the blue lights I think we're talking about white lights now. We had blue lights before, so we'll miss the blue. I think there's going to be an opportunity for a lot of celebrating around this bridge, from the soccer stadium to the baseball stadium to who knows what. So I don't know. Those lights may be very nice to be able to flick on once in a while. I just want to make another picture on the other side of the issue.
You can have those things on the stadiums themselves.
No, but you know.
Okay, so we've had a motion to approve the preliminary site development plan. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Okay, thank you. Next is a even simpler item on today's agenda. Item 5B, the approval of preliminary and final site development plans for supplemental perimeter fencing at the National Zoo. The Commission has received hundreds of public comments on this proposal, and we certainly appreciate the public interest in this project. Today, we are reviewing Phase 1 of the National Zoo's Visitor and Security Project, which addresses both the perimeter fencing and consolidation of entry points. Phase 2, which hasn't been submitted for the Commission review yet, will address visitor screening facilities. Also, we are not reviewing proposals for a parking garage at the zoo at this time. That project will also be submitted for concept, preliminary, and final review at a later date. Mr. Gerbich is going to lead this presentation. Thank you.
Great, thank you. So good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and members of the Commission. The Smithsonian Institution has submitted site development plans for supplemental perimeter fencing at the National Zoological Park in Washington, D.C. The project was reviewed as a concept design last month and is now before the Commission for preliminary and final approval. So the National Zoo is located off of Connecticut Avenue in northwest Washington, D.C., in a largely residential area of the city. It's generally bounded by Klingel Road to the north, Adams Mill Road to the east, and Calver Road to the south. The zoo also sits within Rock Creek Park, which is managed as a unit of the National Park Service. The zoo currently has 13 identified points of pedestrian entry, as shown with orange circles on the image on the left, most of which are informal. As can be seen here, 9 of the points of entry are clustered at the top of North Road near the bus parking lot, with another near the Amazonia exhibit and Research Hill at the bottom of the zoo. These entries would be consolidated to 3 as shown in orange on the right, including the main entrance on Connecticut Avenue, another near the bus parking lot, and a third at the lower zoo. The yellow circle on the map to the right is a potential future entrance associated with the parking garage that the Commission reviewed as an early concept design, though the entrance is not included as part of this project, as was noted. The large majority of pedestrian entry points are a short walk from the consolidated entrances, which is where most pedestrian traffic currently enters the zoo. This map shows where existing entry points would be closed, as well as their closest entrances. The blue circles are entry points with nearby access to the consolidated entrances, and the red circle would have no alternative access nearby. The only area where pedestrian access would be closed without a nearby alternative is the location near Research Hill in Amazonia, which is in an area of the zoo property that is largely identified for use by staff only. Of note is the fact that half of the entrances to be closed are clustered in parking lot B, which is highlighted here. This image shows an example of one of the entrances that would be closed in the area. While zoo visitors will have fewer entry points from parking lot B as a result of this project, future plans for the zoo include converting this lot to exhibit space, so these access points will not be needed in the long term. The Smithsonian has indicated that several studies have identified open access to the zoo as a safety concern, and that there have been a series of high-profile security incidents and threats to the safety of visitors, staff, and animals. To meet security needs, the zoo is proposing a visitor access and security fencing project, which it is planning to implement in multiple phases. The first phase, which is the subject of this review, will secure the perimeter through the installation of fencing and serve to formalize the 3 visitor access points. It's important to note that public access through the entrances would still be open at the completion of this phase. The future phase will include the installation of facilities for visitor screening at each entry, which will be submitted for commission review as a separate project in the future. The extent of security measures to be implemented at these facilities is still under consideration by the Smithsonian and will be brought to the commission along with this future project. Staff would like to note that to date, the commission has received many comments in opposition to the idea of visitor screening facilities. To address outstanding concerns, staff suggests the commission requires any submission for future screening facilities to include supporting documentation explaining the need for and benefit for such facilities. Before I review the new fencing, I first want to review the layers of existing fencing that have been installed in various locations to meet several different objectives. The image on this slide shows the extent of existing fencing, as well as the main zoo area that will be secured as part of this project, which is shown here in red shading. The outermost layer of existing fencing is shown here with a red dashed line and secures the zoo's property line, which reaches out across Rock Creek and Beach Drive towards the adjacent neighborhood roads. During a reaccreditation process with the Association of Zoos and Aquariums, it was determined that the perimeter fencing in red was unable to meet animal containment needs because of gaps at 3 locations. 2 where Rock Creek flows at the north and south ends of the site, which is marked with a blue line, and a 3rd where the Harvard Road Bridge crosses into the zoo to the east. Because of these gaps, the boundary fencing could not effectively contain zoo animals in the event of an escape or fully protect them from surrounding wildlife. To address this deficiency, the Smithsonian submitted a containment fencing project for commission review and approval in July 2012, which is shown on this map in purple. While this fencing meets the zoo's animal containment needs, you can see that certain areas along North Road still have open access to the Central Zoo for visitors. The current proposal seeks to close this fencing gap and to upgrade other areas of fencing to meet new security standards. This slide shows the overall site plan for the proposed fencing, as well as images of the 3 consolidated entrance locations. Overall, the dashed lines on this map show existing fencing, and the solid lines show the proposed fencing. The different colors indicate different fence types, as shown on the legend. I'll review each area of existing and proposed fencing in detail in a moment, but want to note that all proposed fencing will be visually similar to fencing that's already installed at the zoo. Additionally, the existing perimeter fencing, including adjacent planters at entrances, are not considered historic, and the DC SHPO has indicated that the project would have no adverse effect on historic properties. In its concept submission, the applicant indicated that the fencing would be installed with minimal impact to existing mature trees or important vegetation, and that new plantings would be added to integrate fencing into the landscape. At that time, the Commission requested more information regarding potential impacts on existing trees and the addition of new plantings. NCPC staff has had several conversations with National Zoo staff since that time, who has noted that the alignment will avoid any desirable native species and that any undesirable, non-native, or invasive species may be removed as part of the effort. They've also stated that their tree replacement policy dictates that any tree would be replaced at a minimum of a 1-to-1 ratio to maintain the tree canopy, which is generally consistent with NCPC tree replacement policies. As part of this project, the applicant has indicated that it plans to install several pedestrian and vehicular gates in the new fencing that would allow for operational and maintenance access at key locations along the perimeter. They're marked here in yellow. The circles represent pedestrian entries and the squares are vehicular entries. There would be a combination of swing or slide gates at these locations, examples of which are shown here. In concept review, the Commission requested additional information regarding which types of gates would be installed at each proposed location, as well as renderings that show the placement of the gates. The map on this slide provides the additional detail requested in that review, including the width, style, and function of gates at each proposed location. The applicant also provided updated renderings that show more precise locations of each gate, which will be shown on the following slides. Based on the updated information, staff finds that the proposed gate types are consistent with others used throughout the zoo and that the locations align with existing service entrances. I'll next review all of the areas of proposed fencing by segment, along with submitted renderings that demonstrate visibility of the fence from key viewpoints, which are marked on each map as a gray circle. This first segment of fence is at the northwest corner of the zoo at the intersection of Connecticut Avenue and North Road, adjacent to the main entrance and visitor center. 8 to 12 foot tall black vinyl coated chain link fencing is proposed for this location, which, as shown in the rendering, would run along the ridge of the hillside adjacent to areas of vegetation. In the previous submission, ornamental fencing was planned for this location, but in its review of the project, the Commission of Fine Arts expressed concerns over the visibility of ornamental fencing. CFA recommended chain link fencing in this location, which they noted would be less visible in areas of dense vegetation. Staff has analyzed this change, concurs that chain link fencing would be less visually prominent here, and further notes that it's consistent with adjacent segments of existing chain link fencing. Continuing around the zoo, the second segment would run from the visitor center to the bus drop-off. This segment would use a new fence type, an 8-foot tall vehicular rated ornamental fence, which would be used in visible locations along the roadway to prevent ramming. It would be similar in style to the existing ornamental fencing used at the zoo, with the exception of larger post sizes and horizontal reinforcing channels and cables to meet crash rating standards. It would connect to the east to a tall wooden stockade fence, shown with a dashed orange line, which is used to shield a maintenance area from public view. As can be seen in the rendering, this segment of fencing would separate an internal walking path from North Road and the outer zoo perimeter. Continuing along the perimeter, the fencing on the third segment will connect at the west to the bus drop-off entrance and will extend along the American Prairie exhibit in North Road. Because of its proximity to the road, it will also use the vehicular-rated ornamental fencing. As can be seen in the rendering, the fence line would run across the existing landscaping and would cross the existing driveway to parking lot B. Moving along North Road, another segment of vehicular-rated ornamental fencing will be used along the perimeter of parking lot B, shown here with the purple line, with a second layer of chain link fencing that is marked with the green line. The chain link fencing at this location would be temporary because parking lot B is temporary use. When visitor parking is consolidated into the central parking facility, lot B will be removed and become exhibit space, as I noted earlier. The temporary chain link fencing will also be removed at that time. The rendering on this slide shows the location of the ornamental fencing along the outside of the parking lot. Moving past parking lot B is another new segment of chain link fencing, which would connect further down to an existing segment of chain link marked with the dashed blue line on this map. In concept review of the project, the Commission noted that this segment of fencing was highly visible, which can be seen in the original rendering at the top of the slide. The Commission requested at that time that this segment of fencing was moved back into the vegetation. The revised rendering at the bottom of the slide shows the modified fencing placement, which staff notes is further back into the dense vegetation and will be less visually prominent. It also pulls this portion of fencing away from North Road and allows for open pedestrian access to the adjacent sidewalk. Staff believes that this solution adequately addresses Commission concerns expressed in review of the concept design. Near the zoo's power plant, a modified chain link fence would be built upon existing flood control walls. The fencing in this location would serve to secure and isolate the power plant from the main zoo. The initial proposal at this location was the use of modified ornamental fencing, but again, in response to comments from CFA, the applicant has revised the submission. Staff has analyzed this change and supports the use of chain link fencing. The last segment of fencing on this side of the zoo is the purple area highlighted here. The existing ornamental fencing in this location would just be replaced with the vehicular-rated fencing, which would prevent ramming along North Road. Staff believes that this change will not affect the overall character of the segment of fence. Continuing past the existing fencing at the lower zoo entrance to the other side of the zoo, vehicular-rated fencing would be used to secure the pedestrian walkway along the zoo's Amazonia exhibit. Please note that while the rendering shows existing security gates at this location, the project would include the removal and replacement of these gates for consistency in style and to avoid redundant security measures. This segment of fencing would connect to existing ornamental fencing to the east and existing chain link fencing in the vegetation over to the west. In conclusion, it's the Executive Director's recommendation that the Commission approves preliminary and final site development plans for supplemental perimeter fencing at the National Zoo. Notes the purpose of the project is to replace some areas of existing fencing, add segments of fencing to eliminate gaps, and consolidate pedestrian access points. Notes that these future consolidated entrances are the primary entrances to the zoo today, and that the only area where pedestrian access will be closed is intended for staff use only near the Amazonia exhibit in Research Hill. Notes the applicant has changed 2 segments of ornamental fencing proposed in vegetated areas to chain link fencing, which would be less visually prominent in these locations. Notes that the applicant has moved the segment of chain link fencing along North Road back into the existing vegetation, which will reduce visibility. Notes that the Smithsonian will submit a proposal for visitor screening facilities in the future, and requires any submission for visitor screening facilities to include supporting documentation explaining the need for and benefits of such facilities. Before I conclude the presentation, I'd like to note that staff has received many public comments in opposition to this project, which are attached to the EDRs in front of you. As noted earlier, most of the concerns were related to the construction of visitor screening facilities at the consolidated entrances, which will be considered under Phase 2 of the project. We anticipate that these outstanding concerns can be addressed during this future review process. That concludes my presentation. I'm available to answer questions as our representatives from the Smithsonian, the zoo, and the consultant team.
Thank you, Mr. Gerbich. I'd like to now invite Al Horvath from the Smithsonian Institution, who's here to speak to this project. Welcome, Mr. Horvath.
Thank you, Vice Chairman Gallus and members of the Commission, for allowing me just a few minutes to add to the thorough report provided by Mr. Gerbich. Thank you. I would briefly like to emphasize just a few points. The safety and security of our visitors, staff, volunteers, and collections are of paramount importance to the Smithsonian. And of course, at the National Zoo, our collection happens to be a living one. At the same time, we work very hard to balance this with a desire to provide a high-quality experience for the millions who visit our public spaces every year. It's sometimes a challenging task, but I believe that we have done an excellent job historically. Our approach to security is not static, but it evolves over time, responding to our own experiences, events that happen around us, and information that we gather from our continual research and engagement with other security organizations. We also regularly benchmark with other zoos and with the Association of Zoos and Aquariums on this and many other matters. We don't apply a broad brush to our security approaches, given the diversity and breadth of our facilities and operations. We don't view the zoo in the same way that we do the Air and Space Museum on the Mall. The project before you this afternoon is a logical step in rationalizing security at the zoo, guided by the master plan developed in 2008. We will add 3,800 feet of fencing to the almost 16,000 feet already in place. We'll replace 530 feet of existing fencing with upgraded material. The focus of this new fencing will be primarily around the perimeter between the public areas of the zoo and roadways and parking areas. It will allow us to consolidate the number of pedestrian entrances from the current 13 down to 3 primary access points through which the vast majority of our visitors now enter: Connecticut Avenue, Harvard Street, and now the bus drop-off area on North Road. This will enable our zoo police officers to manage their efforts more efficiently and allow the zoo to provide a more effective visitor service offering to the more than 2 million people who come each year. The addition of the fencing included in this project will not result in changes to the current visitor experience, nor will it result in a daily screening protocol. We greatly value the park-like setting of the zoo and the affection that many people have for this space. As I mentioned earlier, however, our security procedures are regularly evaluated. If, at some future date, we believe that we need to make further changes to our approach at the zoo, we are committed to a public engagement process with neighbors and other stakeholders before we bring any proposed actions to the Commission for its consideration. The National Zoo is an incredible asset for the D.C. area community as well as visitors from afar. The beauty of the zoo and its natural setting are characteristics that we value and we are committed to maintaining in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Horvath. I know there are going to be questions, but I think in the interest of time, I'd like to first ask the 3 registered speakers to speak so we can hear their observations as well. First is David Alpert, representing Greater Washington. Mr. Mr. Alpert, you have 5 minutes to speak.
Thank you very much, members of the Commission. My name is David Alpert, and for those of you who I know many of you, and those of you who don't know me, I am the founder of Greater Washington, a news website and advocacy organization around urban planning, transportation, housing, and other issues about the development and growth of our region. We have volunteer contributors from Greater Washington write many of our articles, and one submitted one last week about the proposed zoo screening and fencing project, which yielded over 1,600 signatures and comments in opposition to both screening and fencing, which are in your packets. I want to speak briefly about both the fencing and the screening. But in general, as many people have pointed out, the park is the National Zoological Park. It is explicitly intended from its founding to be a park-like setting, to be a part of the park, and was designed by Frederick Olmsted to be an integral part of a park rather than a completely standalone facility. As such, residents of the area have often enjoyed the interplay between surrounding neighborhoods, park facilities, and the zoological park itself. But unfortunately, the fencing and other things that have happened at the zoo recently, such as closing the zoo to early morning people walking through, like joggers, being able to traverse the zoo, has set the zoo on a trend of withdrawing from being as much of a part of the park and being as much a part of the city. And this is something overall that is of great concern to many of our readers, community members, residents, and others. As I think is to some extent, though I know it's not before you, the parking garage concept, which in some senses is giving up or turning back on the ability for the zoo to be to be as much of an integral part of the city and as much reached by public transportation as it has been in the past. That is not to say that the zoo is removing public transportation access, but by investing resources in having people just drive to a garage instead of many opportunities to add transit, walking, and biking access, I think that is also part of a trend that worries me of the zoo seeming to be withdrawing somewhat from the city. Let me speak briefly about the fencing and then about screening. While it's true that many of the comments were opposed to the screening facility, I also have heard very many concerns about the fencing. It doesn't seem to be very clear, even from the presentation, why it is necessary to close most of those entrances other than it will rationalize access. I understand it's easier for the police if everyone only goes through a very small number of pathways, but that same argument could be used for saying maybe people only should be able to go on and off the National Mall at one or two streets and not all the streets that currently exist. That's not entirely persuasive. Also, if you go to the picture, and if you can go to the picture, the site that the staff recommendation cites as being only adjacent to staff areas that are supposed to be accessed by the staff is, I believe, unless I'm confused here, also adjacent to the Rock Creek Park Trail, which actually is closer to that entrance than the staff-only facilities. The Rock Creek Park Trail, as you know, weaves through the zoo property. It is a significant problem already with access in Rock Creek Park that the walking and biking trail requires people to deviate through the zoo through a path that is closed some of the time, while people on Beach Drive can drive under the tunnel at all times. When that is closed, people have to navigate an extremely narrow sidewalk in order to get through the zoo. So I'm not sure that it's entirely true to say that this is only a staff-only access. Finally, about screening, I understand that this is not before you, but it certainly sounded to me from especially Mr. Horvath's comments that is very much in the intention of the zoo still to move towards screening, with statements like saying that we in the presentation materials that security needs to be upgraded. Upgrade is a dangerous word to me. It simply means that there's an assumption that more of something is always necessarily beneficial, and there's a lot of what I see in this presentation that suggests that. The previous study that the zoo has cited only said occasional closures should be enough. And I would suggest that the Commission strengthen the language in order to say something like that it has significant concerns about any future plans for screening, and not just that it would like to see information before there be screening, but actually expressing a greater level of concern about that, because residents have extremely strong concerns about that, as was clear from the reaction to this proposal. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Albert. Got to get used to that. Next, I'd like to invite Mr. David Epstein as an individual, and you will have 3 minutes to provide your testimony.
Thank you very much. I was somewhat encouraged by the two gentlemen's presentations. I'm a relatively new resident of Woodley Park, almost 2 years, and I've certainly noticed an anti-change streak in our neighborhood that I find troubling at times. Also, I'm not oblivious to security concerns, both personally and professionally. I myself was a high school student in Chicago, present at a school shooting that prompted discussion of screening stations at my school. Professionally, I was a former crime reporter at the New York Daily News who started at midnight. I assure you nothing happy that's going in the New York Daily News happens between midnight and 10 a.m. But I also learned during that time 2 important things. One, that people's perception of danger of violence is inversely proportional to actual violence in the world, and that's backed up by psychological research. And 2, that developed urban parks are among the safest inhabited areas in the world. I learned that it was news when something happened in Central Park or Prospect Park, not because the parks were so dangerous, but because they were so safe. A quick glance at crime statistics suggests to me that the same is true for the National Zoological Park. The lone high-profile incidents I could find seem to have occurred near, not in the park. Although when I was there, I did witness a problematic domestic interaction between Kyle and Bonnie the orangutans, but they already have security. As to the rest of the primates who traffic the zoo, I've found it to be a wonderful melting pot of visitors and locals from all walks of life, flowing freely in for visits short and long. Due to the layout of the zoo spread over a large area, I think decreasing entrances will endanger some of those shorter organic visits, like the ones that people who get off at Gallery Place stop into the Smithsonian American Art Museum here. I could have driven a car right into that just before I got here. This security plan, I think, in some regards, is a solution in search of a problem, and once implemented is one that we can never go back on. The character of the park, and this is a public park, will be changed forever in order to make a place that is already ridiculously safe appear like it could potentially be dangerous, and ultimately that it might need magnetometers. So I'd like to leave you with a literary image to consider in the hope that it will serve as a mnemonic that sticks in your mind. In the 14th century, Giovanni Boccaccio wrote the Decameron shortly after the Black Plague wiped out half of Europe's population. The structure of the book, which I highly recommend, is a series of stories told by students who have retreated to a garden to tell tales of romance and comedy and all these aspects of civil society that they wish to restore, that were taken by the plague that they restore through storytelling. The Zoological Park is one of the precious few gardens to which we can retreat from that which plagues us outside of the park. And I hope that you demand great evidence of the need and efficacy before turning our garden retreat into what amounts to an outdoor building. I think we should take a lesson here from the epidemic of overtreatment in medicine and consider base rates, which is that when a problem is very, very rare, it takes an extraordinary intervention to make it less rare, to treat it. And it amounts to screening programs that treat a tremendous population to try to get at a very, very rare problem. And if you see what's happened in medicine with this, it simply doesn't work. It creates more problems than it solves. And so I hope we'll keep that in mind going forward and demand great evidence for a great intervention. I've also happened to have been stuck on one of those running paths when the gates were closed, and it took me about 3 seconds to hop one of those big iron fences. So I would also question that efficacy. That said, I was very encouraged by the presentation by these two gentlemen. I thought it was very thoughtful, and so I was glad to see that. And thank you very much for this process and for allowing public comment. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Epstein. We have one additional speaker, Jonathan Hers, who will be speaking as an individual. Welcome, Mr. Hers.
Thank you.
You have 3 minutes.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak. I'm speaking from the other side of the park, from Mount Pleasant, and also not in my official capacity on historic Mount Pleasant. But I'd like to bring back the idea that was mentioned in the presentation of the Frederick Douglass Bridge, which has to do with people in the community. This entire presentation review had to do with the construction and the aesthetics of the fence, but nothing about the community surrounding the zoo who are going to be impacted by this and future actions by the zoo. This seems to be a continuation of the theme that neighbors don't matter, which the zoo has unfortunately been proceeding on since at least the 1990s when they closed the Adams Morgan entrance to the zoo. I think the comment that the neighborhood will be consulted needs to be examined and needs to be made a little bit more forceful. Before the hours were changed for the entrance, for access to the zoo in the morning, there was a community meeting of sorts. It was last minute. It was basically more an announcement than a discussion. Questions were asked about what was the security basis for limiting the hours, and there's no evidence presented. The chief of security at the zoo was asked why this was being done, and she said, well, the director asked us to consider this. And I think that we need much more discussion of that. I think also the idea of the image of the zoo and what it projects to the city and to the world is also very important. Another thing that was not mentioned, and perhaps understandably at this point, is pedestrian and bicycle access. Right now, the path was mentioned, the currently unmaintained path. I think it's very important to look at that, to maintain that access for the community around, particularly to the east of the zoo, where people are not driving to the zoo from the suburbs, where there will be the parking garage can accommodate them, hopefully. And I think another thing also in light of the unfortunate recent reconstruction of the bridge south of the zoo tunnel was not built as constructed, and the sidewalk is narrower than had been presented to the community. We don't want any more problems built on top of that. So I appreciate the presentation, the staff comments, and the excellent work that you're doing, and I hope that you'll also give great scrutiny to this project. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hers. I'd like to open up now for discussion from the commission. Commissioner May.
So I have a handful of questions to start with. I'm a little unclear on what action the Commission of Fine Arts took and how that might affect what we are doing. They approved the concept with comments for further development, and we're already at final. It seems like we're slightly out of sync.
Yeah, I mean, I know that the comments from CFA were primarily kind of related to the use of ornamental fencing in certain locations, and that was kind of refining that met their needs, and it also wasn't objectionable to staff. So that was kind of, they moved forward with preliminary and final response to our concept comments.
They moved ahead with.
They submitted preliminary and final addressing our concept comments.
Okay. And on one of the comments is that in the CFA's letter was about the fence points at the top, and I'm wondering. I mean, that raised a question for me because when I look at this, I'm picturing that this is tubular metal pickets that have just been compressed and made pointy. Is it actually solid bar fencing, or is it?
I don't know the detail of the fencing materials. I do have an elevation if that's helpful to take a look at, but it doesn't show.
No, it just, I mean, maybe this is just because this came up at CFA.
Yeah.
And it's, I mean, I don't know, it's one of those minor, small points that is important to me.
I'm Doug Hayes. I'm with Michael Ferguson Landscape Architects, and we've been working on this project, and it's a tubular fencing by Ameristar, and they are compressed at the end. And the fencing type, the ornamental type that is currently installed, was approved by the Commission and the Fine Arts.
And that was the same. It was the same style.
Exactly the same style.
And if they had problems with wear and tear on those, because I know that it only takes one person grabbing it. I don't know. Maybe Mr. Epstein didn't have that problem when he climbed the fence, but I've seen them bent pretty easily.
To my knowledge, I don't know of any problems. That's why we're continuing with it. The main issue is that we're going to be using a vehicular rated style for protection of the visitors between North Road and close pedestrian walkways. So that's
fine. This is a small point.
Yeah.
And maybe this is a question for Sony, but what's the the funding and timing situation for this? I mean, is it funded for construction? Do you know when it's going to go?
It's in our fiscal 19 plan, and assuming we receive the level of funding we're expecting, we would plan to do this in 2019.
In start construction in 2019?
Start and finish in 2019, yes.
Start and finish it in 2019.
Yeah.
And also the question, because we had so many comments about this, one of the questions was had to do with bicycles, and I don't even understand where bicycles are allowed now. I assume they're not allowed through the main gate, and people can't go riding around in the main body of the zoo. But do people on bicycles make the transit from one side to the other along North Road? Is that where cyclists go, or anybody know where they go now? Anybody there have a bicycle?
I think one of the places where bicycles go is along Beach Drive.
Right.
And some of the comments we received is for the pathway around the tunnel that is sometimes open and sometimes closed.
Right.
And we will continue to close that.
And that one I know about. It's the going from Beach Drive to Connecticut Avenue. Is that a transit that anybody makes on a bicycle? Because that was sort of implied in some of the comments.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody seems to know about that. Well, maybe somebody does.
Hi, Kim Workman with Smithsonian. Currently, bikes are not allowed through the main part of the zoo. People can walk them through the zoo, but they cannot ride them. So if somebody's coming in from Connecticut Avenue going down to Harvard Street, they would walk it through the zoo, and they will still be able to do that after this fence is.
But do they ride their bicycles around on North Road? Doesn't North Road connect from Connecticut to?
They do, but I've never seen bikes along
Okay, so maybe I misunderstood what was in the comments. And what is the rationale for having to close the connection along the trail near Amazonia and Research Hill? The reason I ask this is that the Park Service, the Rock Creek Park staff also reviewed this, and that was their one question about this. I mean, generally speaking, the visibility of it and the look of it, they didn't have issues with, but they questioned that because they thought that was frequently used, that people go off the trail and use that entrance regularly.
We actually don't get that many visitors that come in that way. We get a few handful of joggers that might come in that way, but they can just go down to the next exit entrance, which is down at the lower zoo. Really, most people that are on that path just jog through the one gate out the other gate that doesn't even come into the zoo.
So it is used by people who I mean, people go across that bridge or whatever, but they don't.
No.
They don't go actually into the zoo.
They don't actually come over the bridge. The pathway comes in off of Beach Drive, goes around through on the other side of the creek from where this is, drives along the path, then goes back up out towards the tunnel on Beach Drive.
Okay.
And also to clarify, kind of having gone out there and seen a little bit of this, the kind of the direct access from Research Hill kind of over into Amazonia, there are these sidewalks that kind of come up across the bridge, and there's this crosswalk on the right side.
Mm-hmm.
But other than that, that crosswalk actually runs into a gate. On the left side here is a gate. And then there's no sidewalk that kind of continues around that path. It's like you kind of come up, you can see that there are the two gates there.
It feels like it's clearly back of house.
It doesn't imply that it's a place that you'd want to kind of like a main entrance for the zoo now.
Okay. So the debate on this changed dramatically in the last couple of weeks, right? We saw a presentation in June, and it was, all about fences, and it seemed like a logical consolidation of fence points. But, then the internet explodes with all these comments, and it seems to be largely a reaction to the prospect of screening. And frankly, I did not know anything about the prospect of screening from our past reviews, so I'm really confused about that. And it raises a question for me about whether we are looking at enough of the picture at this moment to be able to take action. I mean, I was not thinking about the prospect of screening. I mean, it may have been mentioned at some point, and certainly we all face that prospect. Certainly in the Park Service, we deal with that potential all the time, and we design new facilities with the possibility of screening needed in the future. But we try to explain that right up at the very beginning. And I'm a little concerned that we would be taking an action related to the fence that anticipates this other aspect without understanding that other aspect. So, I mean, I think that's probably my biggest concern at this point. Certainly, the prospect of doing that begs for substantial community outreach. I mean, that's pretty apparent. And I can also say that when we face moments like that, we take a break and we stop and we go back and look at it. I mean, right now we are re-examining a bridge that already got a level of approval here, a pedestrian bridge across the Anacostia River that we heard very late in the process, like years after we had done an EA about this and had done extensive public outreach. We learned that there was a concern among the rowing community who makes substantial use of that portion of the river. And we work very closely with DDOT on this. It's actually sort of jointly funded with DDOT, but we're having to go back and look at that design of that bridge. And this is fully funded for design and construction, and we're having to take a step back. We're going to have to go through some more commission reviews and approvals. So, it's not a happy thing to have to do things like that, but this kind of calls for it. And certainly the commission did that with the Kennedy Center Pavilion in the river, again with the rowing community. And there are other examples. I mean, it was the ICC in Bethesda where the commission was prepared to take an action, and the neighbors raised major issues and brought up these concerns, and the project changed significantly as a result of that. And I wonder if this is another circumstance like that.
Commissioner Wright, would you like to?
I would. I feel like this is the same thing. I'm more than concerned. It feels like being asked to approve perimeter security for a building one elevation at a time. And we would never do that. Or a jewelry maker would not evaluate a necklace without the clasp. It feels like that. It's not a complete composition, and it does feel a little bit, I think the explosion in the public is, I read all of it. I read all of the comments, I read all of the letters, and setting aside the template ones, there seems to me to be a variety of legitimate concerns, and once again, we don't have an explanation for what the threat is. Is there a threat analysis that's been submitted? The even as recently as yesterday, the press release from the Smithsonian doesn't really say, it says we're catching up with what everybody else is doing. And I understand that too. I mean, we've spent a lot of time at GSA, kind of retrofitting our buildings, and I've said many times, okay, we just got to stop wringing our hands. We have to do this, stop worrying about, and just accept it as a fait accompli, and we've got to do it. But this is not a building. It was designed to be porous. And I know that times have changed, but I feel uncomfortable I feel uncomfortable with it because we don't know why it's necessary. It's incomplete in terms of showing us we're seeing it in increments, and I too was I thought last time, well, and I think I asked a question about going from 14 to 3 entrances, and I was satisfied with the answer. But when you add then the screening pavilions that were published in the Washington Business Journal, I think it elevates it to a whole different kind of project. So I feel I'm not sure we should be asked to opine on this until it's complete and we have the full picture of why do we need it, and the full perimeter security apparatus all as a whole. And I also have to say the same thing. The planners on our staff are called community planners, and community planning involves the community, and the community is making a big push to be heard here. And I think that we owe them a fuller examination of the why and the how at this point. So I would suggest that we defer altogether, because I'm not sure that, despite, I wrote a briefing memo up to for people at GSA on Monday recommending that we vote for this, but I did not understand all the things that I just explained, and I know that our staff has been debating it all week since the revelation of the final piece really started to bubble up, and I think there's a great deal of discomfort with it. So I would suggest deferring until we get a full picture.
Any other comments?
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
I'd like to ask the Smithsonian what impact this would have on their planning and et cetera, if there is a delay.
We are ready to go with this fencing plan, and I would try to put it into this kind of context. Think about our approach to security as a master plan, and think about this as an element of that master plan. We are not coming to you today with a proposal to erect structures at the entrances. We are not here proposing changes to the current way in which people get in and out of the zoo. To the point that Mr. May made earlier, certainly we've taken a step back as a result of the feedback we've gotten over the last several days and have reevaluated our own thinking. But there's not a final decision on moving ahead with tighter security, and it's our belief that this project, this incremental fencing, will have very, very limited impact, if any noticeable impact, for the visitors and their experience. One does not lead necessarily to the other.
So it's not going to have any impact, then to delay it for another month would not be a major problem for you? Yes or no, I mean?
No, but by the same token, I won't be able to come to you in another month and say, well, we are or we aren't sometime in the future going to change our security approach. Today, we're not. And, 25 years ago, the way that you got into some of our museums is very different than today. We're not desirous to change the feel of the National Zoo. It is one of the gems of the city.
No question about that. I just would react a little to the public outcry about this at this time, and whether a delay of a month would give us a chance to deal with that concern within the community. That was my only thought.
Okay.
May I ask, what is the price tag?
It's $1.5 million.
So, and that's just for this phase, for the incremental?
It's for the fencing.
And what is the budget forecast for the screening facilities?
We don't have a hard estimate yet because we've only done a concept. We haven't done anything.
No cost estimating came with the concept?
It's about $2.5 million, I think, but it's very, very high level. And there are no real specific designs that we've done. They were all
Well, what was in the Washington Business Journal then?
It was a concept study.
Okay, so, well, I guess you just said that you're not seeking to change the feel of the zoo, and I think a lot of the comments, I think, address that issue particularly. It was sort of this ephemeral stuff, the very subjective the character of the zoo as an urban park and its porousness and all that. So I think the community disagrees with you about whether or not even the incremental fencing would change the character of the zoo. And I should note, it would be 2 months because we don't meet in August. So
I would urge you also to consider the challenge that our zoo police officers have and our desire to try to create a situation for them where they can be more effective and more successful in what they do. So I just want to make sure that we balance that. We are trying to balance both the desire to make sure that we can effectively secure this space.
But that's part of the problem, though, is there's this big mystery about what is the threat. Has there been a threat assessment done?
Yes, it's ongoing.
And are we going to be, would 2 months give you the time to share that with us, even in an executive session? Because it's difficult to understand the need for this. And it may also be, we may be at a point where in the continuum where people, because the variety of bless you, the variety of incidents and the breadth of typologies is such that we may be, as a culture, coming to a point where we are thinking, well, maybe there's just no way to protect against every psycho out there, or terrorists or whatever. I don't know, but I will say I was as surprised as anybody. Like I said, I recommended a yes vote on Monday, but I'm not prepared to support it now because I think the public's outcry, at the very least, requires a more thorough explanation of the need, it seems to me.
I have another question, though, about the consolidation. And I know we're looking at it from the security fence side and if there's a phase two, but I think we've talked a lot about the idea that somebody's being consolidated on a parking lot that was going to be another building. And so all of our conversations right now, I think so was that lot B? Can you go back to me?
Yeah.
So, I mean, a lot of your conversation, Mr. Burbidge, kept saying, well, we're consolidating because there's anticipation of future development there as well at some point? Or was that?
Well, it was that the impact would be relatively low, considering that will all be kind of moved into an exhibit space eventually.
So that's another piece for me as we think about this going forward is I don't want to have conversations where. So this might be once again an issue. And I haven't been here when we've done that new facility. If that new facility is coming in, I don't want a conversation that precludes the ability also for other physical expansion in the future. So I know we're thinking about the fence now, but if this consolidation is also under the idea that at some moment in the future, this would be another facility expansion of the zoo, I just want to be mindful of a conversation that doesn't preclude us from having a conversation about the expansion of the zoo in this parking lot in the future. So I think we're conflating that. I know we're talking about porosity and those ideas as well, but we just got to put a pin in that for future development as well and what that impact might be. So if there's some more conversation thinking about that, I'm fine. But to me right now, that's where I'm at.
Mr. Cash.
So, not to be a pessimist here, but I'm kind of starting to see these different projects in one big light. I mean, sure, we're consolidating several entrances there along the north side to create a single entrance. And we're looking at maybe doing security checkpoints. But I mean, I think that this is one of the things this is setting up might be less about security, and we're creating more of a defined access, and maybe going back and looking at what the Simpson-Bowles Commission recommended years ago, which is a means to maybe start charging admission sometime in the future. This just raises a lot more questions when you're controlling the access to what's now essentially uncontrolled access with all those entrances. I mean, it can be a slippery slope, I think, under the guise of security to say that could be an easy next step, because now we can just take your tickets and you can buy them at these eventually 4 entrances. So I'm hoping that's not the case and that there's cold water thrown on any future plans for admission. But the other thing I wanted to say is that with these renderings that made it out to the Business Journal, I'm not sure why they made it to the Business Journal. This isn't the first time we've had an issue with the Smithsonian issuing renderings that have actually caused you greater headaches. I'm thinking about the South Mall Master Plan, where there's these really cool looking renderings of some possibly structures that not everyone agrees with. And now we've had renderings go out there a little bit prematurely, and you've started this whole firestorm where if we just kept it to the fence for now and then come back to us later and say, okay, now this is our phase 2. But I think that it was kind of a self-inflicted wound here with the public, judging from everything that's gone on online and with a lot of the testimony here, that I'd urge you in the future to be careful about releasing those things that can really muck up a potentially unrelated project like this fence project. And it really has, I think, combined the two. So I just wanted to put that out there and make that suggestion to Smithsonian.
Mr. Hayes, did you have a comment
on that? That the renderings were requested by CFA to complete our package to them. So that's where they came from. Just wanted to. That wasn't something that was done surreptitiously. We were requested by CFA and provided it to them.
A brief comment, Mr.
Griffiths.
First of all, I agree with some of the things that have been said, and I think in terms of community input, it's important for us to understand that. I recall some very supportive community input on the last time we were here looking at the parking garage particularly. But most importantly, I think our charge is to take that under advisement along with the application and along with the staff report and then render decisions. So first and foremost, I think it was used to say we were conflating a lot of issues and then summarizing them in a community opposition. I don't agree with that. I don't think that's what we should be doing. I do find some rationale and logic to what is being presented here. In reverse, I would say, can you imagine if Smithsonian had come to us and said, you know, we kind of want to create this zoo based on a spine. So I don't know that I agree that it's a porous design. It's a spine that has a top and a bottom, and all kind of exhibits feed off of that. But ultimately, it's that spine. But we would rather have 13 kind of random entrances, no real edge definition, and we'll kind of throw some, surface parking here and entrances and off that. And we don't really know how we're going to control it, but whatever, things will happen. I'm not sure that would be so successful. Looking at this, I find some rationale and some logic in closing off those, especially with the potential for what's happening in the future. I think in terms of the gates and entrances and some of the structures that are being proposed, again, we're taking that up later. I don't think that precludes us from doing any action on those. I was mostly concerned with some of the comments that were raised about the connection to public transit. But I don't see any of those blue that are proposed closing on North Street as being any sort of community entrance or access. I mean, I've been there for 30 years. I've lived on both sides of the zoo. I don't think I've ever gone in there. I go in on the main entrances off of the south side or the north side, probably east and west. So I think we need to look strongly at some of the rational points that are before us before we kind of throw it all out because we can garner up some major opposition, which is, listen, in any change, it's easier to get opposition out than it is support. I think one of the critical pieces and substantive issues is what the comments that were made off of the Rock Creek entrance. And that has been sporadic in terms of opening and closing and things like that. But that's a specific element that we can actually address, and I think we should. But the others, in my opinion, I don't see why we can't move forward on portions that I find to be, or I hope people find to be, fairly logical. Thank you.
Any other comments? Go ahead.
So I just want to say, I don't think, I don't want to be confused in where I'm coming at this from, which is that, I support much of what the objectives are here. And I think what we've encountered is substantial community concerns. And I think that, based on what Mr. Horvath said and other things that have been said here, I mean, I think that it's entirely possible and hopefully likely that with a little bit of conversation with the community, the concerns that were raised can be addressed. And there might be some small ways in which the plan is tweaked, like keeping, one or more of these other entrances open. But I feel like for us to move ahead right at this moment and give even a preliminary approval to this seems premature, and I don't detect that there's an absolute urgency about going to construction. Yeah, it might set things back a couple of months, but in the bigger perspective, I mean, it's been here a long time. It's going to be here in a long time, and there doesn't seem to be an immediate threat that we're trying to address. So, I mean, I would just say, we've put it off for a couple of months to give the Smithsonian a little room to have conversation with neighbors, and maybe the issues will be fully addressed with the current plan, or maybe they get tweaked a little bit. But I'd much rather do that than race forward with an approval at this moment.
Commissioner White.
I completely concur with Commissioner May, and I think what is troubling me, this all feels very piecemeal, and we've gotten more scrutiny around a high-threat defense installation and more evidence about why that's needed than here, and I don't know, it feels a little out of balance to me. And if closing those entrances for something that's coming in the future makes sense in the future, great. That doesn't seem to be a big threat right now unless it's a security threat. But I'm just not hearing a comprehensive argument. And then seeing that there will be screening facilities and gates coming, from a holistic perspective, why not look at how the whole system works together? And I agree wholeheartedly with the need for just further discussion with the community. There may be a simple tweak here and there, and to hear this much concern, and I love the phrase "great." We need great evidence for a great intervention. Clearly, a lot of people see this as a great intervention, and fences are something this commission has struggled with mightily in lots of places. And what that means from the symbolic nature of these fences and how the conversations we had around the White House. This is not the White House. This is not the Pentagon. I mean, so I think we need to just understand what this is. And I want to be totally respectful to the Smithsonian. I can imagine a place this big is difficult to figure out. But I just think we need to hear more of what that analysis is and how that concerns are addressed for the community. So I would concur that postponing is the correct way to go.
I think there's been a lot of input here. I think what we're hearing is an action that the current Visitor Control and Security Checkpoint Project, as it is called, seems to, that combined with the additional information about screening that has come up, has certainly created a lot of wonderment about what's in store in the future that we don't know. And I think that's what we're hearing from the commission here today. And so there's been sentiments to defer from several committees.
It doesn't have to be, I mean, just the, I mean, if there is a threat assessment that could be shared, or something, I don't even think we need to see that, but some explanation. It doesn't have to be a novel, just a more complete explanation about what the threat is, and then a thoroughgoing conversation with the community. Some public process that is a little bit, that is a two-sided process where there's some response to the community. Because I agree, I mean, it doesn't, when it was just a fence project, it seemed to make perfect sense in large part, but the security pavilions really kind of changed the whole nature of the thing.
So there's
Thus, the need for the explanation. Why?
okay. So there's been a motion and it's been seconded. Any further discussion? Yes, Tom. Mike.
I would just like to align myself to the earlier comments by Commissioner Griffiths. While there can always be more discussion, and if members want other information, would like a better understanding of context, I think there's an inherent logic in what is in the underlying principle of what they're trying to do there. It was piecemealed together in the first place, all the fence lines and the primary and secondary reasons in it, and this is just putting a logic to that. And I think there's an underlying inherent logic. While there's other things that can be discussed, there's understanding of context for potentials for the future that can be understood. I don't think there's a lack of an underlying logic in this. This just seems logical to me in its elements. So I would just like to allow myself those comments. Thank you.
Any further discussion on this motion? Okay. Yeah. Commissioner Shaw.
And so just once again, for me, I've talked about the idea of storytelling, and I've said that before. Just what's the context from the master plan that we approved in 2008? What's the context from the surrounding community? I know. So I've actually heard from some people in the cabinet around sort of the Mount Pleasant interaction. So just what that looks like. I just sort of check the boxes that sort of says I've thought about how this looks all the way around, right? Because I think we've had some real conversations and understanding about access to Metro and all the other things I've been talking about. They make sense. Like let's say that. But just once again, we get tripped up when there's not. They get to 355 and not 360, and that last 5 is the one we're always trying to sort of figure out. And so, if there's any sort of additional guidance you need from our office about any existing small area plans or things that we've done, I'm happy to provide those to you, as well as understand the context in which we're thinking about this as well. But I just want to better understand the planning context.
Okay, so there has been a motion to defer this action until our next meeting, which would be in September. Have you taken a shot, Julia, at what this would say?
Could I ask, would that be enough time?
Absolutely. Well, as long as we understand what you expect in return, certainly.
And we can clarify that for you as well and work with you on that.
Yes, Commissioner Shaw.
Could I just ask, too, that when this does come back to us, that we can receive some kind of a briefing on even the rudimentary security requirements? Because the last big projects we've had, which was the DHS NAC, which I think this fencing is going to be more hardened than the NAC at this point, and we've had the White House fence. All these fence projects, we've always had some kind of briefing, even a low level, to understand the threat. So I think I wouldn't necessarily be comfortable with moving forward with the package of these until we have that in some kind of even very modest threat briefing included with it.
Giving Ms. Coster a lot of work here.
No, it's okay. That's, how about this, that you have moved to postpone the commission action until our next regular meeting and request the Smithsonian provide a briefing on security assessments and conduct public outreach through meetings and other information with the community and other stakeholders.
Is that acceptable?
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Okay, so all those in favor of this amendment signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed?
Opposed.
One opposed. Thank you very much. Appreciate your work to help us all better understand what your plans are. Thank you very much. Look forward to seeing you in that song, right? See you in September. Thank you. Okay, next is Agenda 5C. The Commission's comments on the concept design for access and safety improvements for the Rockville Pike Trail and rehabilitation of Rock Creek and Potomac Parkway. And again, Mr. Gerbich, you're working hard today. You're going to need a vacation as well. Please. Please, go right ahead.
I'm going to go ahead and stand up here again then, move through the next, next project. So again, good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and members of the Commission. The National Park Service has submitted concept design plans for Rock Creek Park Trail access and safety improvements and rehabilitation of Rock Creek and Potomac Parkway in Washington, D.C. The extent of improvements to Rock Creek and Potomac Parkway and Rock Creek Park Trail are shown here in red, and as can be seen, are generally comprised of two main sections. The first area of work, shown here in blue, includes improvements to segments of both the parkway and trail that span from Virginia Avenue to Ohio Drive along the Potomac River. Major work includes the rehabilitation of the parkway, including asphalt mill and overlay, and replacement of light poles and luminaries. While staff supports these projects, general maintenance work and replacement in kind is outside of the purview of the Commission and will not be described in detail. Other work in this area, however, such as Rock Creek Park Trail access and safety improvements, will be the focus of this presentation. The second area of work is highlighted here in purple and includes resurfacing of Rock Creek Park Trail from the John Erickson National Memorial to the Tidal Basin Bridge. In general, the project components that are pertinent to the Commission can be broken into four categories. They include the widening and resurfacing of Rock Creek Park Trail, the extent of which is shown on this map in orange. The redesign of the Belvedere, the Constitution Avenue Northwest turnaround, which is marked here with a blue circle. The construction of a tunnel for the Rock Creek Park Trail under the Theodore Roosevelt Memorial Bridge, which is marked here with the green circle. And trail improvements along the Potomac waterfront near the John F. Kennedy Center. This segment is marked here in purple. I'll next describe each of these components in more detail, including staff analysis and key recommendations. So the first major component is the widening of many trail areas and resurfacing of the highlighted segments. Trail widths currently range from 8 feet to 10 feet, many of which are out of compliance with established trail standards that recommend a minimum width of 10 feet. The northern segment of trail from Virginia Avenue to Ohio Drive will generally be widened to 14 feet, with a width of 10 feet in areas constrained by important trees or other landscape features. The southern segment will remain at 9 feet. The entirety of the highlighted trail will be resurfaced with a consistent porous asphalt pavement as well. The photos on this slide show several different areas of existing paving, which demonstrate both the variability of paving materials as well as the condition of existing pavement. So pavers are currently used along the Potomac River waterfront near the Kennedy Center, which is shown on the left, and the existing asphalt, shown on the right, is generally in poor condition. These conditions can be both uncomfortable and unsafe for cyclists to navigate. Staff believes that the use of porous asphalt along the length of the trail will provide a much smoother, more consistent experience for cyclists, and that the additional width in many areas will allow for improved navigation and reduce the risk of cyclist-pedestrian conflict. Further, the use of porous pavement will help meet stormwater regulations and serve to reduce runoff into the adjacent Potomac River. The second major component includes the redesign of the Belvedere. So the Belvedere was the original turnaround for Constitution Avenue at its western terminus, but since the construction of Rock Creek and Potomac Parkway, it has not served a traffic function. Because of its prominent location at the end of the National Mall, adjacent to the Potomac River, the site was identified as a prime candidate site for a future memorial in the NCPC Memorials and Museums Master Plan, and as you recall, was recently considered as a potential location for the National Desert Storm and Desert Shield Memorial. The site, however, is primarily auto-oriented with a paved drive aisle that allows for vehicular access. The applicant is proposing a redesign that will accommodate enhanced landscaping, realign the trail, and provide a site layout in preparation for a future memorial. The major planned improvements to the Belvedere are shown here, with the existing site conditions on the left and site plans on the right. The red line shows the existing and proposed circulation patterns. As can be seen here, the intersection would be reconfigured to allow the trail to move around the east side of the Belvedere site, where a new crosswalk would be constructed. The area shown in yellow to the right would become a planting bed, and the area that is green would be landscaped with a green lawn. The footprint of the original turnaround would be retained, slightly mounded, and planted. The renderings here show a comparison between the existing and proposed conditions, as can be seen from the northwest along the Theodore Roosevelt Bridge. Staff believes that these improvements would greatly improve safety for pedestrians and bicycles, and the removal of asphalt will reduce stormwater runoff. The proposed landscaping will also serve to create a park-like setting that is more appropriate for commemoration and contemplation, which would support its potential future use as a memorial. The third major component of the project is the construction of a new trail tunnel through the Theodore Roosevelt Bridge abutment just north of the Belvedere. The trail in this location currently shares a vehicular tunnel with the Parkway and narrows to 6 feet in width. This is well below safety standards and has a high potential for bicycle, pedestrian, and vehicle conflict. This project proposes the construction of a new 14-foot wide dedicated trail tunnel that would pass through the hollow bridge abutment. 2 tunnel entry options are proposed, including an arched and rectangular option, as well as 2 possible alignments from the north, one through the center of the abutment and another slightly off-center. This slide shows the existing 6-foot wide trail route that is shared with vehicular traffic on Rock Creek and Potomac Parkway. Note that in addition to the narrow width, there are no hand railings or other interventions here to improve safety. I next would like to review the tunnel options as they would look from the south end of the bridge near the Belvedere, which can be seen here. The existing condition is shown on the left, and the 2 tunnel entry options are shown on the right. Entry tunnel option A is arched with stone detailing, as shown in the top photo. The bottom photo shows a rectangular entry option. In general, staff supports efforts to create a dedicated tunnel in this location, which would allow for a wider trail and greatly improve safety for trail users. Further, staff finds that the arch option is more architecturally interesting and would be consistent with the arched entry of the existing vehicular tunnel and the arch spans that cross the Potomac River. This rendering shows the other side of the bridge and provides another view of the existing tunnel alignment on the left. The photos on the right show the 2 proposed trail alignments that could occur from this side of the bridge, with alignment 1 at the top centered on the abutment and alignment 2 at the bottom slightly off-center. While the abutment is hollow, the applicant has noted that the centered tunnel in alignment 1 would impact a counterfort and would require structural reinforcement of the bridge. Alignment 2 would avoid this counterfort and require fewer engineering interventions. Further, the plans indicate that the trail in alignment 1 would need to be curved to achieve the appropriate angle moving into the tunnel, as can be seen here. Staff believes that this would reduce visibility to and through the tunnel and could pose a safety concern, while alignment 2 would be more direct and allow for greater visibility. In summary, for this component of the project, staff supports the slightly off-center alignment 2 with the arched tunnel entryway because it would avoid impacts to major structural elements of the bridge and allow for clear lines of sight through the tunnel for pedestrians and bicycles, while the arched entry would complement the existing bridge design. The last major improvement is on the segment of trail next to the John F. Kennedy Center waterfront, shown here with a purple line, which includes the widening of the trail and removal and replacement of existing trees and benches. The trail is currently 10 feet wide, but seating areas and benches constrain the functional width to 6 feet. The trail would be resurfaced with porous asphalt pavement and widened to 14 feet, which would require the removal of several trees, many of which are in fair to poor health. It's important to note, while discussing this segment of trail, that this is the location of the pedestrian bridge across the Parkway that was approved by the Commission as part of the Kennedy Center expansion project. The improvements here and at the Belvedere will not affect access to or from the Kennedy Center via the future bridge. This slide shows the improvements planned for this trail segment. As noted, the trail is currently 10 feet wide, but is functionally constrained to about 6 feet due to the benches and seating as shown on the left. The proposed condition on the right shows a widened trail as well as the porous asphalt surface. It also shows that the recessed areas for seating would be reduced, effectively creating a consistent 14-foot wide trail in this area. Trees will need to be removed to accommodate the change, and several new trees will be planted. While the submission notes that many trees would be replaced, staff would like more information to better understand the extent of mitigation and compliance with the tree replacement policies in the comprehensive plan. Accordingly, staff requests that the applicant provide a narrative that describes the tree replacement strategy for the project, as well as how it will prevent a net loss of tree canopy in accordance with the policies related to tree canopy and vegetation in the comprehensive plan. In addition to the more significant project elements, there are a couple other minor improvements of interest to the Commission. The first is the removal of a segment of sidewalk along the north side of Virginia Avenue adjacent to the Parkway, which is shown in orange on the image on the right. There are no crosswalks on this side of the street that connect to any adjacent sidewalks or trail segments, nor does the sidewalk continue along the Parkway. The placement of the sidewalk is confusing for pedestrians, encourages inappropriate street crossings, and presents safety concerns. Staff believes that its removal will help improve navigation for pedestrians and cyclists at this intersection. Lastly, the submission notes that signage will be provided throughout the project area, which will further improve wayfinding and navigation. Staff supports the need for additional signage, but to ensure sufficient information to analyze the scope and scale of its placement, staff requests additional information regarding the extent and location of any proposed wayfinding signage. In conclusion, it's the Executive Director's recommendation that the Commission comments favorably on the proposal to improve Rock Creek Trail, finds that site improvements and landscaping proposed at the Belvedere will help formalize this location as the site for a potential future memorial, supports trail alignment 2 with the arched tunnel entryway because it would avoid impacts to major structural elements of the bridge, allow for clear lines of sight, and complement the existing bridge design, notes that several trees will need to be removed to widen and realign the trail segment near the Kennedy Center, requests that the applicant provide a narrative that describes the tree replacement strategy for the project, as well as how it will prevent a net loss of tree canopy as described in the comprehensive plan, and requests additional information regarding the extent and location of any proposed wayfinding signage. That concludes my presentation. I'm available to answer any questions, as are representatives from the National Park Service and design team.
Thank you, Mr. Gerbich. Wondering if Commissioner May has any comments on this fantastic plan.
It's fantastic. Thank you for capturing that. No, we're just very pleased that this has moved along. It's been a long time. I mean, this is a remnant of prior projects having to do with improving access for pedestrians and cyclists to the Kennedy Center, and in conjunction with the pedestrian bridge that's already been approved. We are accomplishing a lot of that, and I think making it easier for our visitors to get to the Kennedy Center, making it easier for people to pass through the area, making, finally being able to do something with the Belvedere, which has been a neglected resource for us. So we're very excited that this is now moving forward, and it's funded all the way through construction, so we want to get it built. So, thanks.
Any other comments, questions? I have one minor question on slide 14, please. I just am trying to understand the road network that's happening in the proposed. Or maybe slide 13 helps, but I couldn't get it from this.
Yeah, so basically the area that you can see, the kind of expanded green area over on the right side, so that would kind of move out to the right, and that side lane there would kind of move back onto the main roadway, and the turn would occur kind of where that existing leg is over on the right side. So it'd be kind of reorienting that so you have an intersection that occurs, kind of a more traditional intersection that occurs in that location.
Okay, and that's two-way, that's one-way traffic at this point, or two-way traffic?
Two-way. Right now, again, you kind of have it coming in from one side and out the other. It's going to be kind of going in and out in the same area in the proposal.
It'll be two-way, but of course you can only go one way at certain hours of the day when the Parkway reverses.
Understood.
But yeah, it's.
Some people actually follow that.
I mean, this is an important part of it. We're capturing a little bit more green space instead of asphalt, but it's very important actually to regularize that intersection a little bit, because right now people come off that Parkway and shoot right up to the Memorial Bridge, and it's just a speedway there, so this will slow things down.
One other quick question on the timing. Since this is a concept design at this stage, when do we think we'll be seeing preliminary? You have a sense of that?
That is probably a question for Park Service.
The compliance path is pretty easy. This is a categorical exclusion, and we have more compliance work to do, but I actually would ask Tom Shiflett, Federal Highways, if you can tell us more about when we think we'll be submitting for preliminary. I mean, I think it's within a few months. You need to come to the microphone.
Come to the microphone, please. And please announce your name and your role in the project.
All right. My name is Tom Shiflett. I work for Federal Highway, Eastern Federal Lands. I'm the project manager for this project. The next submittal will be about the end of August, beginning of September. I don't remember the exact day. So that will advance these concepts a little bit more, probably would be the preliminary stage. Some of the other work, which is mostly rehabilitative in nature, will be actually to a 70%. And
so but you're talking about the design development. I think
Yes.
what that boils down to is that we'll be back in the September, October
Oh,
time
okay.
frame for
Yeah.
preliminary and final, something like that?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments or discussion? Okay, hearing none, I'd entertain a motion to approve. Thank you. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Unanimously approved. Thank you.
Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Next is agenda item 5D for approval of preliminary site and building plans for the new master clock facility and the rehabilitation of several historic buildings at the U.S. Naval Observatory, submitted by the Department of Navy. I'm looking at our clock on the wall, and I'm hoping that we're right on time with the master clock. Again, we really appreciated the very, very informative presentation on our site visit this morning, and thank you for taking the time to walk us through that very much. So today, Mr. Fliss will again give another presentation on the master clock.
Yes, thank you. No more bridges. This is a submission by the Department of Navy regarding the master clock facility, which is also includes the rehabilitation of several historic buildings at the Naval Observatory here in Washington, D.C. So the observatory campus is on about 72 acres in northwest Washington, D.C., about a half a mile west of Rock Creek, near Massachusetts and Wisconsin avenues. That's highlighted here on the screen. You can see it's in the middle of several highly densely populated neighborhoods, with Woodley Park to the east, Glover Park to the west, and Georgetown is to the south. The campus has four primary tenants. They include the United States Naval Observatory, the oceanographer of the Navy, the U.S. Secret Service, and also the residence of the Vice President. The areas of work for this project are highlighted here in blue. The Commission did approve a master plan for the Naval Observatory campus in 2014. However, the new master clock facility, which you're considering today, was not captured in that plan. Since that time, the Navy has done extensive basic facilities requirements analysis and also some additional programming to identify the need for this facility. The analysis also identified the need to rehabilitate the old clock house building, which is 3, buildings 52, 52A, and 78, which I'll walk through at the end of the presentation. The old clock house will continue to serve as the operations base and also the sleeping quarters for the astronomers. So the Naval Observatory performs an essential scientific role for the United States, including the Navy and the Department of Defense. Its mission includes determining the positions and motions of the Earth and other celestial objects, maintaining precise time, determining the Earth's orientation in space, and maintaining the master clock for the Department of Defense. The campus has been determined as eligible as a historic district for the National Register of Historic Places, including the building, structures, and landscape elements contributing to its significance. This period of significance begins in 1881 and ends in 1954. Architect Richard Morris Hunt designed many of the buildings and landscape features for the campus beginning in the 1880s. And these buildings are the only known examples of his work in Washington, D.C. These include the clock house, which I mentioned, as well as the administrative building. So as part of their process, the Navy did compile a historic landscape survey in 2017. This identified significant historic landscape elements, which informed the decision for locating this new master clock facility. And this diagram just shows you some of the analysis that they undertook as part of that. So moving on, I'm going to talk now about the proposed siting of the facility, including its location and design. And so while consolidating many functions into one building, the design of the new master clock facility must address many requirements and constraints while meeting the mission needs and project needs, integrating into the existing site and landscape, and also being compatible with the existing buildings and also the spatial organization of the campus. So for mission reasons, the master clock facility needs to be located as close as possible to the clock house while addressing some of the constraints on the site, including security, avoiding some geothermal fields, archaeological sites, and also avoiding sites that interfere with some of the existing telescope buildings. So these all are constraints on where this building can be located. Prior to the submission that you have before you, the Navy actually looked at some other options and met with the agencies early in the design process to look at a different location, actually directly north of the historic clock house, and that's shown here. This was problematic in several aspects because it would visually compete with the historic buildings, including the clock house, and the axial relationship established by the historic building would also impact the landscape elements. This location shown here was dismissed, and the Navy identified a new location, which is here before you today. I'll also note with this particular scheme that the Navy and the agencies found that the concepts for the exterior design, which are there up in the top right, were problematic because they started to replicate the more traditional architecture and stylistic designs found on the campus. As you'll see, the Navy has submitted a different design approach in response to some of these comments. So here's a kind of a blown-up plan of the proposed facility. This location is slightly northeast of the historic clock house because it does best address some of those site constraints that I mentioned. Vehicular access to the facility would be provided by extending an existing avenue around the site, and this extension will eliminate an existing dead end. Pedestrian access to the clock house will be from the existing network of sidewalks in the site, and there will also be a new sidewalk planned along this road with ADA access to the new building. The new facility will also comply with stormwater retention and erosion regulations. It will also include rain gardens at the front and rear of the building, which are highlighted here in blue. Therefore, staff does recommend the Commission support the Department of Navy's proposed location for the new master clock facility, as well as the site location, noting that it is lower in grade than the historic clock building. So now looking at the proposed design for the master clock facility, there's a rendering here. The function of the facility requires the building to be linear in plan, 1 story in height, and approximately 15,000 square feet. It is served by redundant equipment rooms located at each end. And for security reasons, a single entrance is the primary ingress and egress with some additional emergency exits. The building's operational program requires there be no windows, and therefore the only other openings are those related to mechanical systems. Following some of the latest agency discussions, the design has evolved to reflect a more minimalist contemporary design, which really quiets the building, allowing it to be in the background and also not to compete with some of the existing historic buildings. As you can see here, the design is rectangular in form with 2 wings that intersect near the main entrance. The facade of the building facing the old clock house has 3 openings, the main entrance, as I mentioned, plus the emergency exits. The function of the master clock facility requires some special security features, including a perimeter fence. An additional sliding gate for egress and access will also be provided. Here's a rendering of the rear view of the building looking from the northwest. And this is a rendering showing the master clock facility in relationship to the historic buildings, which are kind of up in the upper left. The exterior finishes shown here are intended to complement the other buildings on the campus, especially the telescope structures. And therefore, staff recommends the Commission support the design of the master clock facility, as well as its minimalist contemporary architectural expression, finding that it does not compete with the architectural character of the historic buildings designed by the architect Hunt. And it also relates in function to the master clocks for the Department of Navy. Staff does, however, recommend the Commission request the Navy provide some additional views and perspectives, particularly from the north side of the clock house, which again is Building 3, looking northeast towards the entrance of Building 1, as well as from the ceremonial drive to the northwest. And these are indicated here in the red arrows. And then finally, very quickly, I'm going to walk you through some of the proposals for rehabilitation of some of the other buildings. The first is Building 3, again, the original clock house. This will continue to serve as an operations base and, as I mentioned, sleeping quarters. The foundations for the historic transit houses, which are Buildings 6 and 7 on either end of this building, will also be stabilized. Some of the improvements include removing the current vinyl siding and replacing it with wood siding and trim. The existing standing seam copper roof will also be retained, and other original historic elements, such as crown moldings, flooring, and the chair rails, will also be restored. In addition, a new ADA access lift will be provided in a manner that's complementary to the existing building. Buildings 52 and 52A will also be rehabilitated. Again, existing non-original windows and other materials will be replaced, as well as the addition of anti-terrorism protection requirements. And then stormwater management has also been incorporated into the project. And then finally, Building 78, which consists of the original one-story astrographic laboratory, which was built in 1932, with a later addition in 1961, shown here. And this rehabilitation will include some stone repairs, repointing, and cleaning, as well as some additional modifications. So overall, the design of the new master clock facility balances a constrained site, as well as some specialized operational requirements and historic preservation considerations. The site location, design expression, massing, and palette of the proposed building are proposed to be compatible with the existing historic buildings while avoiding competing with some of those historic facilities. And therefore, it's the Executive Director's recommendation that the Commission approve the Department of Navy's vision to consolidate the master clock facility into one facility, and the vision to rehabilitate historic contributing buildings on the campus, including the old clock house. Support the Department of Navy's proposed location for the new master clock facility. Supports the design of the building and its minimalist contemporary architectural expression, and also requests the Department of Navy provide additional views and perspectives from the north side of the clock house looking northeast, as well as from the ceremonial drive looking northwest. This concludes my presentation. Available for questions, as well as representatives from the Department of the Navy. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fliss. I'd like to open this up for any comments, questions. Commissioner May.
Yeah, I mean, I thought it was very, very helpful doing the site visit earlier today and understanding what goes on there. I mean, it really is a fascinating facility. I think that, I appreciate the work that the staff has done and the Navy has done to design this and place it carefully, and I think that's the right strategy. I think generally the architectural strategy is right. I do find the rendering of the building, and I don't know if I mean literally how it is drawn or how it is finished, to be lacking. And so I feel like we need to understand that better, and hopefully as we go through further reviews, that'll be refined and it'll look better than just a stack bond warehouse kind of thing, because it kind of just, I mean, part of it is just the drawing. It's just the drawing, but it'll look better. Yes.
You hater.
Anyway, I look forward to seeing it again, but I think
I
it'll be-
certainly
it'll do well.
hope so. Suffice it to say, the Richard Morris Hunt is not under threat by the new buildings. That's the only thing I had to say. And maybe it is just the rendering, but you know, it looks like it. You know, those container stacks down by the ballpark right now.
The way it's rendered, I'm assuming that's a rendering thing, and it is a difficult problem because it can't have any windows, right? And I imagine it's got to be, sealed like a drum for humidity and all that other stuff. So it's really hard to make a handsome building with those specifications. And I'll just leave it at that.
This clearly is a building in the presence of greatness. There's some amazing, armature around it that we need to make sure complement what will continue to make this a wonderful site. Any other comments at this point?
I want to respond to something that Commissioner Wright said, which is that no windows and a lot of building controls, HVAC, that sort of thing. I mean, yes, that's true, but where else do you see that? You see it in museums, and museums are very often very fine-looking buildings. So hopefully we will get that here. We know how hard it is to deal with a museum with windows, right?
Yeah. Yes.
My personal experience.
Personally.
Yes.
Yeah. However, there are some windows in most museums in some part of it, and my understanding is this thing has to be a sealed container, and that's a challenge.
Yeah.
Sensing no further comment, I'd like to entertain a motion to approve the preliminary site and building plans. And second? Thank you. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Okay, thank you very much. Next is Agenda 5E, the preliminary site and building plans for the Consolidated Communications Center at Joint Base Andrews. Mr. Weil is here today to give a presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes. Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and members of the Commission. The Navy has submitted preliminary site and building plans for a new Consolidated Communications Center on behalf of the Air Force to be located at Joint Base Andrews in Prince George's County, Maryland. The Commission previously reviewed this project for concept back in November 2017, and since that time, the Navy has modified the design to reduce costs and to respond to a number of our previous design comments. Joint Base Andrews spans 4,400 acres, bordered by Allentown Road on the west, Pennsylvania Avenue on the east, and Suitland Parkway to the north. The installation has a daytime worker population of approximately 17,000, a residential population of 2,600, and is home to various organizations from the Department of Defense, Maryland National Guard, Maryland State Police, and District National Guard. The 20-acre project site is located in the main administration district, which hosts a variety of uses, including the base exchange, a commissary, a fitness center, a conference center, and the Jones Building, which serves as the installation headquarters. The site is now home to a number of older vacant buildings previously used for light industrial and maintenance service functions. Also included in the project limits are two buildings, buildings 1539 and 1558, which currently house the functions that will be consolidated into the new Communications Center building. The project will be implemented in two phases. Phase 1 will demolish the existing on-site buildings and construct the new communications building and associated site improvements. And Phase 2 will demolish buildings 1539 and 1558 and return these sites to open green space. The new communications building is sited near the current operations to ensure reuse of existing to enable reuse of existing underground utilities, which would be prohibitively expensive to extend to other more distant locations on the installation. So here's a close-up of the preliminary project site plan with 270 parking spaces, rear building mechanical areas, loading and emergency access, an arched driveway for drop-off traffic, and main entry walkway. And here's the building's potential expansion area, which would allow extension of the building's east wing in the future. Here's a comparison between the concept and preliminary designs with a number of changes, which include maintaining the original inner arch roadway fronting the old headquarters site, as well as reutilizing several radial paved areas for the new building parking, reducing the building size from 98,000 to 79,000 square feet, fully connecting the limited access emergency delivery drive along the south side of the building, reconfiguring and relocating government vehicle parking, and reducing the number of loading dock bays. The preliminary design maintains the required standoff buffer around the building pursuant to Department of Defense security standards, which is unchanged from the concept design. In here you can see the standoff buffer drawn around the current building footprint with its potential future expansion area, which would likely require eliminating the closest one or two radial parking areas to the east. The new communications building will have 2 levels, similar to the concept submission, with a style based on current 2004 Joint Base Andrews architectural standards. The building is designed with a brick veneer, faux windows, accent bands, and a standing seam metal roof. In response to NCPC's previous comments, the submission specifies that the building will include shower locker room facilities, on-site bike racks, and reserved carpool van pool parking in nearby lots. Preliminary plans also show an arched drive in front of the building to accommodate drop-off traffic and potential future transit service. In recognition of these changes, the Executive Director's recommendation will include a finding that the Navy has modified the site and building design in response to previous NCPC comments and to minimize project costs. Furthermore, in light of the Navy's decision to reuse nearby existing paved areas for parking rather than constructing a new lot, the final recommendation will recognize the Navy for reusing these areas to minimize construction costs. And one last point is, although the design of the project is consistent with current 2004 Joint Base Andrews design standards, we're requesting an update to the installation standards to reflect better and current design practices. At the time of our previous Consolidated Communications Center review in November, we requested broader level information on future area circulation, street sections, parking, and vegetation in an effort to understand how the project would fit into installation plans for the area. In response, Joint Base Andrews submitted its current installation development plan to NCPC for review this past January. Although, as a framework and recapitalization plan, we were not able to glean enough information on plans surrounding physical development other than a notional westward extension of D Street to connect with North Perimeter Road and Arkansas Avenue. To help us overcome this information gap, the installation submitted an internal concept plan for the Administration and Support District from 2010, with conceptual building footprints, a street network, parking, and area vegetation. The installation development plan recommends a more detailed area development plan for the district, and the Air Force has requested funding for the plan in fiscal year 2019. So you'll see a reference to their request in our final recommendation based on the importance of a more detailed area development plan for our ability to review future projects in the district. The 2010 plan serves as the redevelopment vision for the area, reinforcing the district's function as a primary activity hub and backdrop to the Jones Building and other more prominent uses. And we note the plan's consistency with several NCPC urban design policies, including providing extensions to adjacent streets, incorporating shared open space into new federal development, and breaking up superblocks with open spaces and shared access. In the next few slides, I will display the internal concept plan on the left and a satellite image on the right with superimposed infrastructure to help provide a larger planning context for the project. So here's the proposed new CCC building situated within the current Alabama Avenue alignment, just to the south of the Jones building lot. And here is the existing and potential future network, street network, depicted as solid and dotted lines respectively. In particular, I would like to highlight two key features of the area concept plan as they relate to the new communication building site. The first is a street that we refer to as Center Street, extending roughly to the northwest of the project site into the heart of the Administration and Support District. And the second feature is the westward extension of D Street across the front north side of the new communication building to provide a direct connection to Arkansas Avenue and North Perimeter Road. In recognition of these two planned features, staff has expressed support in the final recommendation for Center Street and the D Street extension, which will help structure the district's future street grid network. In addition, the final recommendation includes a finding that the project's preliminary site plan does not preclude a D Street extension or Center Street alignment as depicted in the internal concept plan. Moving in a little closer, we can see Center Street alignment skewed intersection with the arched driveway and front entrance at the building's point of inflection, which results from the project's need to work within existing developed areas as much as possible, in addition to a required setback buffer area and the Meeting House branch stream area immediately to the south. And we've noted these project constraints in our final recommendation with a finding that the building's main entry is not on axis with Center Street due to various site considerations. With the design and construction of the new communication center prior to development of a more recent area development plan for the district, it is challenging to comment on the project's relationship to other nearby planned future development. Nevertheless, staff has identified two basic relationships between the internal concept plan and new building that should be maintained. First, the new building's east wing should orient roughly parallel to the D Street extension. And second, the location of the front arch driveway should be at the terminus of Center Street in support of good urban design planning principles. Both of these relationships will help meld the new communications building into the planned future administrative and support district fabric and development. And we've captured both of these points in the executive director's recommendation as summarized on this slide. Regarding the area's interim circulation with traffic along Alabama Avenue diverting around the north side of the building through two parking areas, the Air Force assures us that this circulation scheme is manageable based on current traffic patterns, with virtually no through traffic traveling between the Alabama Avenue D Street intersection and Arkansas Avenue. So we will be noting this as a finding in the final recommendation to the Commission. And a couple of final project submission requests in anticipation of the project's significant impervious surface reduction and required compliance with state and federal stormwater management standards. We're requesting a final stormwater management plan and supporting performance documentation. And in support of the preliminary submission's promise to mitigate tree removal based on a 1-to-1 replacement ratio, we're requesting a final landscape plan and other necessary documentation that demonstrates this in the next and final project submission. So with that, here's the formal recommendation to approve the preliminary and site and building plans for the new Consolidated Communication Center, to find that the Navy has modified the design to respond to concept comments by the Commission and to minimize project costs, to commend the Navy for eliminating the new 300 space lot from the concept plan and utilizing existing nearby parking instead, to note that the Air Force has requested funding to complete an area development plan for the district, and in the meantime, the Air Force has submitted a concept plan for Commission use until an updated ADP is available, to support the planning district's conceptual framework, which creates a simple street grid around Alabama Avenue and D Street, in addition to a Center Street through the heart of the district. Regarding the project site, we find that the proposed site plan does not preclude the D Street extension nor the proposed Center Street alignment as shown in the internal concept plan. The rerouting of Alabama Avenue traffic to be acceptable in the interim based on traffic patterns. And the building's main entry is not on access with Center Street due to site limitations and cost-saving measures. We request that the Navy maintain the proposed orientation of the east wing and driveway location at the terminus of Center Street to support the planned area street grid and development framework. And we request an update of the architectural compatibility standards for the installation to reflect current design practices when submitting the district's future area development plan for NCPC review. And lastly, again, we're requesting information in the final submission that demonstrates compliance with applicable state and federal stormwater management requirements. And we're requesting final landscape plans that reflect a 1-to-1 tree replacement ratio in the final submission as well. So that concludes my presentation. I'm available for any questions. We also have David Humphreys here from the Air Force, who's available to answer any questions about the future ADP or the master plan. And we also have Nick from the Navy, who is here to answer any questions about the project specifically. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Weil. Are there any questions or comments at this time? No?
No, I'll spare you.
Okay. Okay. Hearing no comments or questions, I actually have a comment. I do think that I want to commend the staff for the urban design recommendations that you've made, particularly related to the connectivity of D Street and Center Ave. I think they're really important to creating, giving this building a presence and to making this entire campus a little more connected. So thank you very much for your work. Hearing no other comments or concerns, I'd like to ask if there's a motion to approve the preliminary plan. Moved and second. All in favor signify by saying aye. 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 Opposed? Unanimously carried. Thank you. Okay. Finally, and next up is a presentation on the small cell infrastructure that's occurring in the city here. I'd like to welcome Mr. Michael Baio, who will provide this presentation. Thank you. Okay, man. Thank you. Thanks for.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and members of the Commission. I'm Mike Baio with the Physical Planning Division. Today I'll be providing a brief on small cell infrastructure, which will include antennas and the related equipment placed in the public space throughout the city. Catherine Roos, a P3 manager at the District of Columbia's Transportation of Office Administration, or DDOT, is the lead on this effort and is also available to answer questions. If you recall, in May, Megan Spiegel and Catherine Roos briefed you on the Monumental Core Streetscape project, which they indicated would include a wireless access points in the future. The presentation underscored the importance of the quality of DC streetscapes, which reinforces its unique role as the nation's capital and creates a welcoming and livable environment. Local and federal agencies are working together to address the impacts of this new cellular infrastructure across the city. We're seeing a surge of wireless infrastructure across the country. Cities and towns are working with cellular companies to prepare for the deployment of this new small cell infrastructure while minimizing impacts on their communities' public space. This presentation will discuss what the infrastructure is, examples of how it's being deployed, its impacts, and how it's being addressed in the district. Small cell equipment will initially meet 4G voice and data demands, which we currently use. The providers are preparing to upgrade to 5G, which is the 5th generation of cellular technology. The underlying selling point of 5G is Internet of Things, which is a seamless integration of the multiple devices at much higher speeds on an unprecedented scale. Examples of small cell usage include times when we're paying for on-street parking, ordering delivery, or using GPS navigation systems. To meet the demand for high-speed wireless data in cities across the country, cellular providers have begun deploying small cell infrastructure, which is a new lower-powered antenna technology that supplements rooftop antennas and cell towers. Small cells are installed every few blocks instead of miles apart. Small cell technology consists of antennas and related equipment that can be placed on structures such as streetlights, the sides of buildings, or poles. They come in various sizes and are essential for transmitting data to and from a wireless device. This diagram illustrates a variety of small cell applications. Please note that this following graphic is one of many images that are sourced from a variety of cellular providers. So what we have here our street light to the left here with an antenna and equipment, and utility pole, and to the right of it we have a standalone pole with the antenna above and the equipment, and to the right of that we have a standalone pole with incorporating the antenna and equipment inside of its cavity. Some providers will install single-serving infrastructure, while others will install hoteling infrastructure, which will house up to 4 cellular companies. While small cell infrastructure is an important component to our city's continued ability to innovate, we must also be aware of the potential impacts. I want to underscore that implementation of this technology could result in thousands of small cell antennas and related equipment across the city, and may result in several per block. National interest in this initiative includes impacts to our viewshed, to our historic character, to access and circulation, and the potential for streetscape clutter. The FCC, or the Federal Communications Commission, has exempted small wireless providers from Federal 106 consultation and NEPA review. However, applicable local and state government approvals will still be required. To minimize impacts on the city and address our shared interest to implement small cells fairly and consistently, NCPC staff is working with DDOT and other stakeholders to develop guidelines for small cell placement and design. As long as the providers abide by the guidelines, DDOT will review and issue permits without further agency review. NCPC will review applications on federal land. Why should we be concerned? If we're not careful in managing how small cell infrastructure is deployed, the result can potentially look like what is shown here. These images are initial proposals provided by the cellular providers, and as you can see, each photo montage represents potential applications. To the left, we have a sample Cobra, one of our city's sample Cobras with the antenna above, antenna just beneath, and equipment. We have a Twin 20 with the antenna. We have a Washington Globe, and we have a standalone pole that mimics a Washington Globe with the antenna and equipment. We also have a teardrop, and this teardrop, the antenna on the top as well as the equipment beneath, are both 7 feet tall. This illustrates the type of standalone poles. The photo to the left is of a standalone pole that includes all of the equipment and antenna inside its cavity. Bless you. This type of installation is what is called future-proof, since it has the potential to add equipment including the anticipated 5G technology. It is approximately 18 inches in diameter and requires a hand hole for access and maintenance. This is the streamlined pole here. Anticipate the antenna above, equipment inside of the cavity, and the hand hole for maintenance at the surface. In the middle image is of a standalone pole with the equipment and antenna sitting outside of the cavity. Future technology upgrades will require attachments to the outside of the pole. The image to the right illustrates the scale of a standalone pole and its equipment for access and maintenance. Since the small cell providers have a limited signal range, each provider may be installing hundreds of antennas and related equipment throughout the city to meet their own independent coverage requirements, cumulatively resulting in thousands of poles in public space. So our team took a quick snapshot, informed by current discussions and other city precedents. Using our city's distance criteria, ranging between 250 to 300 feet distance, and taking a sample quarter-mile area of downtown in the Federal Triangle, we can anticipate up to 29 new antennas and related equipment in the right-of-way, as shown. This further illustrates the need for attention. What are we doing about it? DDOT is facilitating a collaborative interagency team to address the local and federal issues mentioned previously. The team members include DDOT, DCOP, SHPO, NCPC, CFA, and NCPC, and NPS has recently joined. DDOT entered into a master license agreement with several cellular providers. Each provider will be installing their own equipment throughout the district. However, some companies are hoteling and install the infrastructure which houses up to 4 cellular providers. DDOT will be administering the permit process. The providers will be issued permits on first-come, first-served basis. DDOT is currently meeting regularly with 3 cellular providers regarding their proposals. Additional providers may be entering into master licensing agreements in the future. Meanwhile, the interagency team is currently drafting design guidelines to address our shared interests. How is the district preparing for small cell infrastructure? The team has researched guidelines from other cities, and we're customizing our guidelines to address DC's unique, local, and national character, as well as functional needs. Because we are concerned about impacts of this infrastructure being attached to our streetlights, we're looking at further studies to address, again, as mentioned earlier, placement and design. The guidelines will address aspects of placement and design of these poles, which include general design specification, spacing between small cell poles, distance from tree boxes and root systems, accessibility, the amount of poles per block, and the poles design and finish. The team anticipates completing the guidelines for a public meeting before the DC Public Space Committee at the end of September. The team will also be presenting this information presentation to CFA next week. Staff would like to thank the district for the opportunity to collaborate on this effort. The district has been really great in facilitating and coordinating with our agencies. This concludes my presentation. We welcome any comments that you may have today. And Catherine and I are available to answer questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bayo. Are there any questions or comments about this topic?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. What other cities have started this process?
Yes. Oh, what other cities?
Right.
What
other cities have started the process?
Denver, Berkeley, San Francisco, San Diego, Winter Haven, Florida, a lot.
Are they pretty far along, I mean, in terms of the process?
Some of them are. Some of them are in the process of receiving approval or reaching approval with their guidelines. Some have achieved approval, and we've been looking at their guidelines as precedents.
The requirement or the ability to do all your carriers or multiple carriers in one installation, is that regulated by the government, or is that based upon relationships of the carriers?
I may defer that to DDOT.
Yeah, so there are one that we have right now, a signed MLA with, that has already indicated that they will be what is called a hoteler, and so that they will be housing numerous different cellular companies' equipment.
Right.
There is no requirement by any means for any one particular company to hotel their facilities. It is a company's decision whether they would like to have their own facilities separate from a possible hoteler.
Well, if we're concerned about clutter and disruption in the community, wouldn't it be to our advantage as a city to try to get them to hotel or to be multiples rather than single installations around?
That's something that is a business decision by the individual companies. They each have...
I understand that, but I'm asking, it seems that it would be in the city's interest to try to encourage it, if not require, that they get together or work out some relationships, because otherwise we're going to have more antennas rather than fewer antennas.
I absolutely see your point. I do not believe that the district has the jurisdiction or ability. I'm not a lawyer, however, and that is a question that a lawyer would have to answer. But what we have been trying to do is, through the design guidelines, is facilitate a conversation that allows us to implement this program as gracefully into the urban fabric as possible, while still allowing what the businesses want and need to do to extend their coverage.
Okay, I'm not happy with that. It would seem to me the city would have some ability to influence this, but maybe I'm wrong. My last question, what's the street value of one of these units? If one were to get them in their hands, what would be the value? Would there be any street value in these items?
That I don't know what the value of any individual equipment or pole. I don't know that that's something that the companies would be willing to share with us. We can certainly ask, but again, I don't know that that's something that we definitely don't have that information now.
Well, if you're going to begin to put these on poles, I think it'd be good to find out what the street value is, because some folks are going to find out what the street value is.
Understanding, and one thing I think should be clear is that all of the equipment, no matter how it is implemented or attached, is the responsibility and the ownership of the individual companies. It does not by any means become...
because I thought we had a policy when we had fiber that everyone had to use the same conduit. So, like, I don't understand why everyone gets their own poles. So, I mean, we had a precedent when we saw fiber go down the first time that we didn't want the cuts. And then the other question for me, and I told you, I'm just speaking out loud, and I know I'll get a call in 2 seconds, is why doesn't our urban design, force is the wrong word, I don't like the word force or require, but strongly encourage hoteling. So like so in the end, it's not, we just let one pole happen on a block and it's not 25, and that's the real estate we give up. I mean, so I just feel like I may need to have a conversation, and maybe I'll report back to you guys too if I know some urban design things on this, but I'm excited. And then I'll say one more thing, and congratulations, I heard your first presentation, very good job. This goes back once again to things I always say, like, this is not Washington, D.C. I just want to say that once again. Thank you for that beautiful non-D.C. skyline. But also, too, with us being in a lot of... I'm getting Commissioner Wright and May on me today. With us being a part of some other networks, I know that China is deploying this as a pilot. I mean, it also would have been helpful in some instances to maybe see what it looks like. I mean, we saw a lot of abstractions on this, but, you know, if we have the same streetscape guidelines as San Francisco, how does it look in San Francisco? I just want to make sure in the end, as this starts to get deployed, it will never, ever look like this. And so, as we're thinking about materiality, about widths, about our own street trees, I just need to see how this looks in DC, if that makes sense. And so, I mean, I'll loop back with DDOT, and Chris Shaheen on our team has been talking about this, and so I just want to make sure that if we can find some renderings, some thinking to understand the real scale within DC, I will personally commit to see if we can get some pictures on that.
Absolutely. Can I briefly comment on two of your comments? I think first it's important to understand the role of DDOT in this. DDOT is a permitting. We permit the right-of-way aside from that of federal lands within the District of Columbia. And because these are installations within the public right-of-way, that's where DDOT comes into this process. Because we know that this has been has significant potential impact, we decided to step in and take the role of facilitating conversations amongst our various colleagues, such as NCPC, CFA, and SHPO, as well as with the small cell companies, to try to find that balance between their own personal needs as well as the needs of the community, and also recognizing that the District of Columbia is unique. We are the only city in America that is explicitly named in the Constitution, and we have a historic nature as the nation's capital, and we very much respect that and want to incorporate that. And that's, again, where we're trying to find that design and balance. And Michael here has done a fabulous job of researching what other communities across the country are doing, but also realizing that not all communities have the same historic context or the same historic elements that we do, such as the Twin 20s, the Washington Globes, even our l'enfant globes that we have. So we're trying to balance all those together. To your point about the fiber, and we can definitely, I'll go back to the director and mention your comments to him. I think fiber is a ubiquitous thing in which everybody uses the same type of fiber from my very limited technological knowledge. Whereas I do know that the providers each have different equipment and different systems that they use, which might make hoteling problematic for them. But I very much take your points of how that could be advantageous, and it's something that we should look into and discuss further.
Yes, Mr. Cash.
I just have to jump in here too because I worked in crafting the P3 law that DC has, and I think maybe I can give a little more context with this issue. So one of the core reasons that we have these small cells going on things like streetlights because it's part of an agreement. We're not going to have to pay for all the great infrastructure we're going to get like streetlights, but now we're going to have capacity for other companies to have their technology on there, which they charge for. So I think that's some of the trade-offs and benefits of these P3 projects that will eventually come to the council for approval. And I will say, because of a lot of these outstanding questions, this was one of the reasons why then Council Member Bowser, now Mayor Bowser, submitted the P3 legislation that we marked up and refined, and it will require that any P3 project RFPs that move forward have to come to the council for the council to approve the RFP. So if we see something that's completely wackadoodle and we don't agree with or anything like that, we actually have the ability to put a stop to it before we kind of get out of control with kind of some of these unforeseen glitches down the road.
Mr. Chair, the idea too in the RFPs, even scoping in basic design guidelines is just something. I'll talk to Director Meridian about it.
I would like to clarify though that this the small cell presentation here is not a DDOT initiative. It is, again, we're a permitter and we're a facilitator. This is completely separate from the P3 streetlight because I actually manage that project as well for DDOT. And so I just don't want any confusion as to this connection to the P3 project because the P3 project is not funded by any money or fees that come from permitting. From small cells. Small cells will have to pay a permit fee, just as anyone pays a permit fee to do work in the right-of-way. That is in no way financially or in any programmatic way connected to the streetlight P3.
Okay, so now I just have to jump back. So the presentation you're giving us today, even though some of these small cells you show as examples of being like on the streetlights, this isn't specific to the P3 project, and this is just completely private small cells? Is going to be DC net carried on any of them?
So
we're not doing it for any of our own infrastructure. This is all for the private sector?
This is all for the private sector. The private sector, their proposals that we've seen so far have a strong desire to attach to our streetlights. And there's also potential for them to install completely separate poles, as you saw in the images as well. So these are all mock-ups of potential attachments to our various streetlights. The next slide is another option of installation of what we call standalone poles that everything is incorporated and not attached to our streetlights. So this is separate. What I will say is the minor overlap between the two, aside from the possibility of incorporating into streetlights, is that Octo has, they are part of our P3 project. You were very correct in that. And they will be installing a very small number. We're talking maybe 200 or 300 maximum, what are called WAPs or wireless access points. And those are about this big. They're, a box. There are already some, if you're familiar with PA 2040, they're incorporated within that project. Octo, is my understanding, also has relationships with the small cell providers that as small cell providers go to install this equipment, they will be provided, if Octo so chooses, with an Octo WAP that the providers will install for free for them. They will be given the equipment to install. So in addition to the small cell equipment that you see, there could potentially be another box on there that, again, is about this big that would be attached, and that would belong to Octo and to the district.
I'm sure I speak for Mr. May when I say that if it's too ugly to go on the ground, we just put them on top of the buildings.
Well, go ahead.
I don't get this at all. I have a bunch of questions. So who's the arbiter of what can and can't go from an urban design quality and in number, design, blah, blah, blah? So that's the first set of questions. The second one is, who said no NEPA?
The FCC did.
Okay, so who's the arbiter of whether or not these things are safe? Because I know more now about antennas than I ever cared to know, in part thanks to Mr. May, who warned me that I would have some explaining to do the next time we came with a batch of antennas, and we have done some very thorough searching on our rooftops, and I've learned a lot about radio frequency, and that there's some serious safety implications, health and safety implications for example, on our rooftops, there are safety barriers, and there's a whole, theoretically, a bunch of signage that warns people, don't stand near these things if you ever would like to have a baby or not have cancer. And who's going to be in charge of that? I mean, are we going to just trust the carriers? We are?
So part of our permitting process and part of the master license agreements that the district has signed with each of the small cell providers requires the small cell providers to provide certification, FCC certification, that the equipment that they're using falls within FCC regulations.
Okay, and then, but who's going to then follow up and verify that what's installed? And then I get to the other stuff that's more in our swim lane. But from my own experience, who's going to verify that the carriers install what they say they're going to? Because that, in my experience, has not necessarily been the case. That approved designs, for example, that go through the gauntlet and come out of here don't necessarily match what's built on the rooftops if nobody's paying attention.
Right. So DDOT has, as part of its permitting and regulations division, has inspectors. I think that you bring up a very valid point about the capacity, given how extensive this program could be, of the district to be able to go and inspect each and every one. And that is a point that I will bring back to our team as an issue of concern.
And if these things are at a very low level,
so the lowest,
I mean, elevation-wise, like 3 feet, 5 feet in the air.
Yeah.
I mean, so who's talking about the health and safety issues? I mean, DDOT's not exactly equipped to do that kind of analysis, right?
Yeah.
So you're relying on the FCC for that?
The FCC, we're relying on the providers to provide us with the certification from that they're abiding by FCC regulations within their equipment. The MLA specifically states that OCTO has the responsibility of certifying that.
What's OCTO?
OCTO is the Chief Technology Office within the District of Columbia. And so they are within the MLA, I believe, have that responsibility. So,
Are
but
they
that's a question.
health and safety experts?
They are technology experts. So.
Okay, and so there's the health and safety stuff that feels like, I don't know enough to know whether or not people who work for FCC or OCTO or whatever have that expertise, but I'm not sure I'd want to be standing next to these things unless somebody who's got that expertise says, is this safe? I mean, I'm assuming that it is, but assumptions aren't a good idea. And then so there's no NEPA, and there's no 106, and there's no urban design review, really. And with all due respect, and I really mean this to DDOT, I don't think you guys are the ones who should be opining as to whether or not this is a cumulatively or block by block, this constitutes a detrimental effect to the public realm. Who's doing that?
Exactly why we're working with your team at NCPC, CFA, and SHPO to talk exactly about that. Again,
But nobody has the authority to tell DDOT, no, you're wrong, and this is a horrible mistake in terms of the public realm.
There is jurisdiction. CFA and SHPO both have specific jurisdictions that are outlined.
They do,
and
okay.
in approval process. But again,
but CFA doesn't have regulatory authority. They have moral authority.
They do have some approvals are needed to go through. And I also know that SHPO specifically has, I believe it's section 9 within the district code, which is similar to a section 106.
But I thought I heard you say that there was no NEPA and no 106 per FCC. So the SHPO is
no federal, but they still have to meet local and state regulations.
Yes.
All right.
Yeah. So, and again, I very much see your point. We're trying to play the role of facilitator to both make sure that the companies are able to implement this program, but also trying to do it in the best way possible. And that's why we are consulting with your experts here in urban planning, along with the Office of Planning and others, to help to create these guidelines.
So they'll be approved through the Public Space Committee then?
Yes, that is the plan right now, is that the design guidelines will be sent out to all ANCs. The ANCs will have 30 business days to review and comment, and then there will be a hearing of the Public Space Committee in which they will hear any comments, make any recommendations, that any edits that might be made.
But then the projects will go through Public Space Committee.
No, so the idea is that the design guidelines would then be adopted if any edits are needed, and after they are adopted, then basically it goes through, as long as companies are abiding by the design guidelines, it then goes through.
But design guidelines, you can drive a truck through design guidelines. The design guidelines are not specific enough.
They would be reviewed at the permit. They would be reviewed through the Department of Transportation at permit. So they would use the design guidelines to make sure if they don't meet it, then there would have to be some type of consultation, I believe.
Yeah, if a company chooses to put in an application that does not abide by a future approved design guideline, their application will then either be rejected and or go through additional review that could include review by each of the ANCs that it is impacted by, SHPO and CFA. The idea is that, again, we're trying to find the balance. The design guidelines and talking to other cities, we found from their recommendations that was the best way to find that balance of the urban design aspects as well as facilitating a program for the business community. And that if they abide by these, then it fast tracks their ability to implement this program. So again, we're really trying to find a balance here from being a business-friendly community, but also understanding the urban and residential and historic nature of the place that we live in.
And what would be the timeline for these guidelines at this point?
They're currently being drafted, actively being drafted, and we are meeting about every week or two. I would say that, and we're, what do you think, Michael, a month? Catherine, about a month? We hope to have.
We're hoping to have at least to get drafts out for people to start reviewing and to get comment on. And we very much take your point. And I think when you see the design guidelines, there are very specific things about how far you can be from a tree or a potential identified tree bed. How far can you be from an additional pole? Alignment in terms of if you're placing a new pole, not aligning with a entryway into a house or into a building, so that, again, we're trying to have the best nature. We've also talked about color and what color they need to be so that they can, quote unquote, fade into the background as much as possible.
All right. Well, yeah. Okay.
I have
Mr. May.
I just want to finish up my answer to him. I didn't get to we are happy to come back when those guidelines are drafted for another informational presentation.
Thank you very much.
That's
okay.
Mr. May.
Yeah, so you mentioned a permit fee.
Mm-hmm.
Is that just like a processing fee, or are you charging them rent?
No, there is a small amount that is charged for rent. These fees vary across the country. I will say, compared to what I've seen in other cities, DC's is fairly modest.
Okay, so right now, the district gets money when a cellular antenna is placed on district property, whether it's on the ground, with a tower, or on top of a building. And that's based on the appraised value of that service they are providing. And there is big money in cellular antenna infrastructure. So if the district is only getting a modest permitting fee compared to other jurisdictions, then somebody needs to take a very serious look at this, because there is big money in this. And if you're charging them, 50 or $100 for so they can put up one of these things, there's a lot of money that they're making that the district is missing out on their cut. Are you compelled to issue these permits within a specific timeline?
So once,
is like FCC imposed, clock ticking or something like that?
No, I will say that the small cell providers are more than anxious.
I know they're more than anxious. I've been holding them at bay for 4 years. So, sometimes FCC there are certain timelines. Like when we get a request for a permit, we have to act within a certain timeline. Are you under that kind of a timeline?
So it is not my understanding that there's anything set out by the FCC. I will say that the district, in trying to be, again, customer service friendly, we have boundaries that we try to process permits within.
And I don't care about that. It's not that I'm unfriendly to business. It's just that business comes and goes, and this technology changes, and our obligation is to the long-term preservation of the District of Columbia, and we have to think in those terms, not in terms of, oh my gosh, we had to make them wait another 60 days for a permit. They can wait 60 days. It's not going to really hurt their bottom line. I'm glad that Ms. Wright mentioned the safety issue. Again, because of my familiarity with these antennas, which is much more than I ever wanted in my life, I know that there are these zones on rooftops where you can't go anywhere near them, and there are all these danger signs, even though everybody says it's perfectly harmless. Well, there's mixed signals going on there. When it comes to the deployment of these things, obviously the Park Service controls certain rights of way, and I know you're not planning on issuing permits for any of those things, hopefully not even accidentally. But we also have to be sensitive to the fact that, these things go in sidewalks, and some of the sidewalks on your right of ways are actually our jurisdiction. So DDOT needs to be careful about that. We have an agreement or a handshake agreement that allows parking meters to be installed in those places, but we're not going to do a handshake agreement on stuff like this.
We won't even accept applications. So, for example, Pennsylvania Avenue between
Pennsylvania Avenue, everybody knows, is ours.
Right.
But 4th Street, 7th Street, 14th Street, those are ours too.
Right.
The sidewalks when they cross the mall. And that's not always known to everybody. There's a stretch of 10th Street that's ours as well. There are all these different complications about it, and we have to be careful about it. I also, famously we've encountered numerous traffic control boxes that have been permitted by the district, have actually been installed by DDOT, right in the walking path or on our sidewalks. So, it requires tremendous attention to detail as DDOT goes through these permitting actions, and people will put stuff anywhere and be, their mission is to improve cellular communication. It is not to make sure that people can walk, or that a wheelchair can get by, or that a stroller can get by, right? So there are all these issues that have to be, not just have to be in the guidelines, they have to be in the review process. And they have to be in an enforcement mode too. You have to be able to send people out after the fact and say, hey, you didn't do it right, go back and do it over. And I think that that's even more reason why the district has to make sure they're getting their cut of the proceeds here, because that's where you get to pay for the additional staff to do those things. And then when it comes to what happens on our land, I do not believe that we are exempt from complying with Section 106 and NEPA. We will still have to do that for anything that happens on the mall or on any of our parks. because it's a separate permitting action, I think.
No, we'll round back up and just confirm, but the way I read the FCC rules is that it does exempt federal NEPA and 106.
Just for small cell?
Yes.
Yes.
All right, well, we will have to talk more about that.
We all are on a huge learning curve.
Yeah.
And it's been a very fast learning curve.
I mean, we've had to go through extensive NEPA and 106 for regular cell technology. And we have been treating our discussions with folks who've approached us about doing this kind of a deployment on our land as if it falls into that same basket.
We could be looking at it incorrectly, but we definitely will look
All right,
forward
well,
to talking to you
we'll look
about
at that more
Yeah.
as well. And I'm glad that we said that there's still NCPC and CFA and SHPO review, right, of this on some level?
On federal land.
On federal land.
And then
Got it.
and
So would we-
the open space around the federal land.
All right, so that's going to be a little weird. We wouldn't have to do NEPA 106, but we have to come to you. Okay.
And CFA will be reviewing, they'll review the guidelines
Right.
and
So
have some
the
additional.
last thing I want to say is that, when we talk about this kind of a deployment with individual antennas, if they are far enough apart, I could probably cope with some of that stuff, but go to one of the pictures with the lampposts. And, these all look terrible. And that was one of the reasons why we've been pushing off these guys from the mall. They all just look terrible. And,
they'd be right next to each other from different vendors also.
Exactly. And so I think there needs to be a stronger hand in this. So anyway, I'm sorry I got a little bit.
Well,
excited there,
I think we want to try to wrap this up, but obviously we appreciate the cooperation that's happening between the city and NCPC and CFA and SHPO, and we know this is obviously a very, very important topic to exactly what we're passionate here about in this commission. So I also need to note that we did receive comments regarding this technology from both Joe Gibbons of ANC 2E and Linnea Warren, both concerned about the impact on the historic capital city and the DC review process. I think in light of the extension of this meeting beyond typical time, I'd just like to thank everyone for your hard work and patience in this meeting. And I want to wish you all a terrific summer recess. I know I personally will look forward to seeing Chairman Bryan sitting next to me in September.
You
Have
did
a great
fine
summer.
job.
Thank you. Adjourned. Thank you.